Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Gonna warn you guys. Ba-da-ba-dum, right off the cop. Ba-ba-ba-da-ba-ba. I went and saw a matinee of a show, and that means that I was not home all day for my little pug. I came home, I gave him a walk. I'm giving him treats right now, but he's definitely looking at me with this, like, John's home, time to play kind of attitude. So he might be a little disruptive through today's stream, which is totally fine and totally normal. The show I saw today, absolutely beautiful. The Captain on Twitch, good to see you, my man. You're actually the first person in. Can you believe it? Can you believe it? The show I got to see today was actually really beautiful. I got to see Merry and Pippin from The Lord of the Rings. Dominic, I forget his last name, and Billy Boyd. The fellows that played Merry and Pippin in Lord of the Rings. They were in a production of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, which is a very popular Tom Stoppard play that I actually was in a university production. So it was really lovely to see not just the play again, but to also see the two of them in the production. It was such a treat because you know it's never going to happen again, right? That's the beauty of live theater, is that it's so special. The show that you're going to see is the only time you're going to see this particular show. It's the only chance that I would have had to see this. They're not going to remount it, right? Kevin, good to see you over on YouTube. The Captain says, yes, dude, that is a sweet haircut. Thank you, sir. I did it just for you. Just for you, just so you know. So I think today I'm leaning pretty heavily on the Discord and the stuff that I found yesterday, but I think I'm going to front load today. XD, good to see you. This is going to be a climate change one, guys. We're going to do a climate change episode today. I have been not avoiding climate change as a topic, but just like there hasn't really been much to report, honestly. Like, we're fucked. There you go. We did it, right? So there hasn't been like how many articles can we read over and over and over again that's just like, hey, did you know we're totally fucked? Did you know that we're completely boned? Hey, did you know? Yeah. And were you aware that our system of capital is not responding rationally to it? Right? How many times can I say the same thing over and over and over again? So for whatever reason, over on the Discord, someone put a very comprehensive article, right? The Busy Workers Handbook to the Apocalypse from Medium, I should say. This is a very, very long article. This is a very long article, but as you can see, there's so many charts and there's so much evidence and there's so many things that I really do want to go through this, because at this stage in the game, it's extremely strange that there is climate change denialism at all, right? But I think we shouldn't be surprised. Oh yeah, I don't think we're going to make it through this whole article, honestly. Like, look how long this is. Like, that's a huge article. It's a huge article. This is a 78-minute read. Yeah, I don't think we're going to get through the whole thing, honestly. But I think that it is past time that we actually do like a proper climate change episode and really talk about what climate change means, what is possible for us coming down the pipe. And of course, this is all happening in the shadow of this massive rising fascism that's occurring, the genocides that are occurring. I know, buddy. I know. And so the climate change issue is like the backdrop of our lives. Dragonfruit, good to see you. Recently read an article that BlackRock CEO wants to raise the retirement age even though the life expectancy keeps declining. Yeah, they're psychopaths, right? No, it's just very straightforward. It's just more evidence. It's just more evidence that shows you very clearly that we are ruled by overt, naked psychopaths, right? Yeah, I'd expect nothing less from Satan, I mean BlackRock. Exactly, Matthias, exactly. Like, My thesis is as clean as it gets. We're ruled by psychopaths who are worshippers of a death cult. And when people like Larry Fink stand up and make those kinds of statements, they're just affirming that that's the case, right? That they're just affirming that that's the case. Yeah, BlackRock also wants to apparently rebuild Ukraine. Yeah, they just want the contracts. They don't care about actually rebuilding it. They just want the contracts to be able to tax the citizens of Ukraine and tax the citizens of America, to be able to extract more wealth. Like, if a building goes up, that's just a secondary side effect, right? And of course, what will happen is they'll get involved in the contracts, they'll get involved in that system of building, and then they'll just be in a perpetual state of building, right? Which is what they do now. You can walk into any city. I see it down here in the city of Toronto. I went downtown in the city of Toronto, and it looks like a bomb shelter. Like, it looks completely bombed out. The place is being torn apart, ripped apart. And it's always like that, right? You go to Montreal, it's always like that, because these developers have no reason to finish a project. And in fact, they use the fact that the project isn't being finished as an excuse to give more money to them. Well, if you just give a little bit more money, it'll get finished. Just a little bit more money, it'll get finished. Oh, we're just a little bit over budget. We just need a little bit more, just a little bit more, just a little bit more, just a little bit more, right? And it's just never finished, because they have found out this formula. Bribe a politician, extract wealth from the populace, never finish the project, continue the extraction process, right? That's the formula, and that's how they do. And that's what they do in order to maximize the profits, right? Yeah, that's why Russia should just take more land. Yeah, the more land that we take. So this article I thought was really interesting. This is a much, much shorter article than this other Medium one, but it's a good starter. It's a good primer. This one's coming out of the Financial Times, okay? So, like, you know that when it's coming out of the Financial Times that things are starting to actually get serious, right? The world is warming faster than scientists expected. This is from the editorial board, even, of the Financial Times. So whenever you see the editorial board, this is actually coming out of, like, the mouthpiece of power, right? Like, the most obvious example of this is the Globe and Mail. Whenever there are articles written by the editorial board of the Globe and Mail, it's being written by the Thompson Foundation. It's being written by David Thompson, right? By the way, a new streamer I watch knows you. He says he likes your content. Skadefront, yeah, Skadefront keeps running raids on me and stuff. And honestly, I shamefully, and it is a shame, like, it's a deep shame. I'm actually ashamed of this. I've never sought him out, and I should. I should seek him out, and I should thank him for running those raids and for doing that kind of stuff. And I should look at his content as well. I just get so, like, in my own bubble and so isolated. And so, Skadefront, if you hear this, thank you for doing that. It's really kind of you, frankly. It's really nice that there are other people and other content creators out there who do that. You know, I don't even know how to do that. And I'm so, like, such a newbie at this kind of shit. And I find when I finish the stream, I just want to hit the button and end the thing, right? Like, I don't want to continue working. So but it's so kind. And it's so kind to hear that. It's so good to hear that there are other people out there, right? Skadefron, Skadefron, over on Twitch, will run raids. And what a raid is on Twitch is that he'll finish his own stream, and then rather than just having that stream end and having those viewers go wherever, it means that his viewers become my viewers. And so people jump into my stream. And so then I say hello to them. And sometimes it's as much as, like, 20, 30 people all at once. And of course, most of them don't stick around because they're there for Skadefront and they don't care about me. But some people do. Some people do. Right? So it's very kind of him to do. DM, good to see you. Good to see you. All right. The world is warming faster than scientists expected. Talk about unfortunate timing. At the start of last week, the head of the world's largest oil company, Saudi Aramco, was applauded when he told the CERAWeek Energy Conference in Houston it was time to, quote, abandon the fantasy of phasing out oil and gas. Amin Nasser said the world needed to instead invest in fossil fuels to meet demand, at a time when the clean energy transition was visibly failing on most fronts. Like, these people need to go to jail, right? Like, these people need to go to prison. Gabriel, good to see you. Howdy. One day later, the head of the UN's World Meteorological Association, Celeste Solo, received no applause for issuing a report that showed climate records had not just been broken, but smashed in 2023, the hottest year on record. More than 90% of the world's oceans suffered heat wave conditions. Glaciers lost the most ice on record, and the extent of Antarctic sea ice fell to by far the lowest levels ever measured. It is tempting to believe we have been here before. Oil, gas, and coal executives have spent years insisting they must satisfy demand for the fossil fuels that still drive the global economy. More recently, even relatively more green-minded European oil companies have weakened their climate goals in the wake of soaring energy prices, and big investors have backed away from climate action initiatives that they only recently joined. UN agencies have warned all the while that those fuels are the biggest cause of a climate warming that is growing more intense. Yet, when it comes to the physical state of the climate, we have not been here at all. To an extent not widely appreciated, the world is now warming at a pace that scientists did not expect, and alarmingly, do not fully understand. At a Financial Times conference this month, Jim Ski, the chair of the UN's Governmental Panel on Climate Change, said last year's spike in temperature was quicker than we all anticipated. It was a surprise, he said. Ocean temperatures were just off the scale in terms of historic records. It was completely unusual, and we still need to do more work to explain it. The unnerving implications of these findings were spelt out last week by Gavin Schmidt, director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York City. Writing in the journal Nature, Schmidt warned that the data could imply that a warming planet was already fundamentally altering how the climate system operates. The surprising heat in 2023 had come out of the blue, he said, and revealed that an unprecedented knowledge gap had opened up for the first time since satellite data began to give scientists a real-time view of the climate system about 40 years ago. This gap may mean we have a shakier grasp of what lies ahead, which is worrying when it comes to forecasting drought and rainfall patterns that are already aggravating food shortages. Theories for the unexpected warming range from a rise in solar activity ahead of a predicted solar maximum to new rules on cleaner shipping fuel that aim to cut sulfur emissions, sulfur compounds in the atmosphere having a cooling effect. But a full explanation remains elusive, which underlines a compelling echo of history. Schmidt's position at NASA was once held by other scientists. James Hansen, whose 1988 testimony to the U.S. Congress alerted the world that global warming had begun. The world did not entirely ignore Hansen's warnings in the 36 years that followed, but nor did it take them anywhere near seriously enough. Oil company bosses may prefer to preach a message of business as usual, but neither they nor anyone else can afford once again to downplay what science is showing us about a climate threat that is now moving into uncharted territory. I feel like that guy, good to see you. I feel like we are now entering fully into flat earth territory, right? Like that we can just start dismissing climate change denialists as flat earthers and telling them so. I mean, that's what I do. I have no interest in engaging people who are just this demented, right? Like we're entering like full blown dementia at this point. You find a climate change denialist and it's just over, right? Like it's just over, and like the people who are funding the disinformation should go to jail. The people who are walking around saying that climate change isn't real should be re-educated. Like, and I mean that fully. Like these people need to go back to school. Like they need to be taught what's going on and how serious it actually is, right? Yeah, and half the country denies it. Yep. Like, I think that the West is going to eat it big, right? That like when these crises start to actually hit the West and start to actually hit, like, full abandonment is their strategy. It is their just full on strategy to do full abandonment. We're not going to experience, like, crises will happen elsewhere in the world, but there will be policies that will be put in to alleviate the suffering, right? Because they don't exist in a system of abandonment, but we do, right? We exist in a system of abandonment, and we're going to see that abandonment full scale, just full scale, full rot, and the people who are walking around saying that climate change isn't real, like, I think that those people should go to jail. Like, especially the ones that were walking around saying funding disinformation campaigns. Like, if you're actually funding disinformation campaigns on media sites, you should go to prison. Like, and we should just forget where you are, right? Like, if you're these fossil fuel executives, if you're a guy like Amin Nasser, you should just go to jail, and we should put you in a cell, and we should forget where you are, right? That should be your fate. Very simply, let's take him and put him in Mark Zuckerberg's underground bunker, right? Let's use that underground bunker as a prison for these people, right? Just lock them in there, weld them in. Like, I just have I've got nothing but ire for these climate change denialists and these climate change disinformation campaigns. Like these guys need a true Goebbels moment. Like, they need to go to a court, they need to be called war criminals, that kind of level, and they need to be put in prison cells and forgotten. So I'm going to go through. This is a huge article, okay, guys? So I might take breaks. I might stop here and there, right? Oh, Michael Dowd was kind enough to narrate an audio recording of this audio. That's kind. We're not going to use that. I'm just going to do it myself because there's so many, like... like, you know, you're in trouble when an article has a contents... I'm not even going to bother with this beginning, this abstract. I'm just going to jump into it. 2022. So current status. 2022 was 1.24 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial. A cooler year by recent comparisons, thanks to La Nina. The average of the last 8 years was 1.28 Celsius. So rounding that to 2, significant figures, 1 will use 1.3 Celsius is our current average warming level. 2016 was a super El Nino year and the hottest year on record at 1.37 degrees Celsius, which may surprise many folks to realize we've already hit 1.4 degrees Celsius, rounding to the nearest tenth. Twice, reaching nearly the same global average temperature again in 2020 during an ENSO neutral negative year. Honestly, I'm really here for the charts. Like, look at this chart. Like, I'm sorry, man. Like, if you're looking at charts like this and thinking, like, that's normal. That's a normal thing that happens. It's a normal thing that happens. It's so super normal. Hi, I like Booba on Twitch says discriminating against rich people isn't good, though. Of course it is. They're psychopaths. They've lost the capacity to have empathy, and they're making decisions to destroy not just us, but themselves. Right? They're unhinged, foaming at the mouth, raging psychopaths. Discriminating against the rich is what you should be doing. Discriminating against wealthy people is what you should be doing. And if they don't want to be discriminated against, they should give their money away. Like, okay. No. You're too stupid to talk to, okay? Like, you're a very, very dim-witted person. You're an extremely stupid person. And so, goodbye. I don't need to spend any amount of time explaining why psychopaths should not be defended. And if you're going to defend psychopaths in my chat, bye-bye. We don't need psychopath defenders in the chat. You're too stupid to talk to. Milo, you're good. Like, no. Bye-bye. Like, bye-bye. How are you still in here? You just got banned. How the hell are you still in here? I just banned you. That doesn't make any sense. What I'm seeing. Yeah. No, just some total loser. No, hold on. That's confusing. I literally just banned you because you're so stupid and not worth talking to. This doesn't make any sense. Okay, well. Hold on. Sorry, guys. How is it that a person who is banned can still actually send messages and be listened to? That doesn't make any sense. Oh, here we go. Block. Yeah, block. And yeah, sure, I'll throw a report on you too. Why not? Yeah, hey, bullying or harassment. Sure, that sounds great. Like, do not defend psychopaths in my chat. Real straightforward. Like, stop defending neo-Nazis. Stop defending, discrimination against rich people. How hilarious. Right? Yeah, we got Low Observable Goat. Cybin18, good to see you guys. That guy, if I haven't said hi, Vestlin, good to see you. So, before we were so rudely interrupted by this obviously unhinged loser, this sharp rise that the rich are causing to us, although we shouldn't discriminate against the rich, right? Why am I still getting messages from this idiot? Like, for real. I don't understand this. Like, I've blocked him, I've banned him, and I'm still getting messages from this unhinged loser. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, I've never actually seen this, so it doesn't make any sense to me. Sorry, guys. I just want to deal with this, because I don't need some manic, crazed person. You guys aren't seeing it? Oh, okay, never mind. Then I'll just move on. I don't need to pay any attention. Okay, if you guys aren't seeing it, then I don't care. I use Berkeley's Earth numbers for current warming for a few reasons, but there is not a significant variation between different sources, shown in the charts below. So just choose whatever you like and adjust my numbers by a tenth if needed. Like, it's from 1850, literally since the moment we've been measuring it, to today. Right? Real straightforward. Right? Real huge sort of stuff. Like, this is what the rich are doing to us, right? They're unhinged psychopaths, and defending them makes you on the same level as, like, a Nazi defender. It's crazy to watch. Like, it's absolutely crazy to see crazy people be crazy, right? Just the absolute insanity that exists in people's minds. Like, we have, like, huge levels of climate change denialism. We have people who are just, like, glucking on rich people, like as if the rich people care. Like, that's the best part. The wealthy do not give a shit about us. Like, they don't care at all. They're trying to retreat into underground bunkers, and they're trying to go to Jeffrey Epstein's pedophile island, right? They use us as cattle. And this is the result of what they've done. This is their legacy, right? This is the legacy of the wealthy. And to worship them is just insanity, right? What do I consider rich? Like, actually rich? I think that once you hit $1 billion, that is 100% wealthy. Right? I mean, I would go so far as to say, like, I think that for the health of our society, we should cap it at $1 million. I just don't think you need any more than $1 million. Like, period. Full stop. You certainly don't need more than $1 million in a bank account. Right? You don't need more than that for sure. This idea that you've got to actually this idea that you have to actually have that kind of wealth is insane to me. Like, I think it's unhinged, frankly, because, like, why do you need 5 houses? Why do you need like 10 cars? Why do you need any of that kind of stuff? You don't need any of that stuff, right? And all you're doing is withholding from people. All you're doing is hurting other people. All you're doing is causing problems for other people. All you're doing but it's not fear of instability, right? Why would it be fear of instability? Like, you are stable. Like, I think it's just straight up psychopathy, right? Like, every time we've studied the issue, once you attain a certain level of wealth, you disconnect from the capacity to have empathy, and it is as though you have brain damage or psychopathy. This is what has happened every single time that we have investigated this issue, right? Every single time we've investigated this issue, we have seen that this is the case. So it's this very no, I just think it's just base greed. It's just this hoovering in as much resources as you possibly can. Like, people have within themselves a dark black hole, right? People have a dark black hole that can never be filled with stuff, although people try. Right? Like, Jeff Bezos shoots himself into space and builds yachts that are so big that he needs a second yacht, right? That this overwhelming power that they have, like, it just means that they get to, anytime they wake up and have any kind of childish fantasy, there's nothing in the way to prevent them from doing it. And if anybody stands up and says, hey, you can't do that, you can just use your wealth to obliterate them and push them out of your way while you simultaneously work to destroy the species. And I actually think that there is like a very dark, very like existential philosophical component to this that the people who are doing it are too stupid to understand. That once you believe that the earth exists exclusively for your benefit, right? Like, once you become a psychopath, once you become one of these unhinged defenders of wealth, you lose the ability for basic empathy, and you lose the ability to understand that the earth does not rotate around you, right? You become exclusively self-interested. Everything exists just for you. Everything exists just specifically for you to consume or use as you see fit. And you have so much wealth that you can literally spend minor fractions of the wealth you have in order to get huge groups of people to just do anything you like. You can just go and have anything you want done. And so if you want to erect, a building full of prostitutes and just have a building full of prostitutes constantly, you can do that. If you want, and if you want those prostitutes to be underage girls, you can do that, or boys, right? You can do that. We've seen that. That's Jeffrey Epstein, right? If you want to erect torture systems, you can do that. We've seen that, right? You can just clap your hands, hire people, and have them do that for you. Right? And so once you disconnect from reality and base empathy and the ability to have compassion and the ability to see the world in a rational way, and you start to believe that the world exists exclusively for your benefit and for nobody else's benefit, and that everybody exists for your benefit as a tool for you to use and for no other reason, well, then what that inevitably creates inside of a billionaire is a sense of resentment. And that resentment comes from the reality that the universe kills you, right? The universe kills you. You grow old and you die. Peter Thiel articulated this as clearly as possible, that Peter Thiel is one of these psychopaths who is trying to pursue immortality. He's literally funded like cryogenic funding, and he's literally funding all of this. He's funding all of these resource hoarding mechanisms and this life prolongation and cryogenesis, right? He's doing all of this stuff to make it so that he can live as long as possible because he's terrified of death. because he's terrified of the earth that he lives on, because he sees the earth as existing only for him, and he can't reconcile that with the reality that the earth makes you grow old and you die. And so what this does is it creates a resentment that exists in the heart of these people. And I think that they get into a pattern of thinking that, well, if I die, the only reason for existence to exist in the first place is me, right? So if I die, then if on my way out I destroy existence itself, well, that's fine, because it was trying to kill me first, right? And you have no capacity for humility. You have no capacity to understand the basic value of human life. You have no capacity to understand any of that kind of stuff. Your life becomes a quest for vengeance, and your vengeance is against creation itself. And I actually think that that is what is manifesting this climate change crisis, that these billionaires are on a literal vengeance quest against reality. And of course it's childish and stupid, because reality can't be beat. You can't beat reality. You can't beat the earth. Like, you can't. That's not a real thing, right? Like, maybe, yeah, you'll do a bunch of damage to other humans, to people who you don't care about. You view them as ants and cattle, right? And then losers come into your chat and simp for you. But I don't know if it's Crow Guy. I don't know if it's purposefully, but they clearly don't give a shit. And I think it's more subconscious than that. Like, I don't think it is them being like, and then we will warm the planet, and then that will mean, like, I don't think they have the intelligence or the capability to think that way, right? I think that they are essentially wild animals, right? And so the warming of the planet is just a consequence of what they're doing. And they either don't care, or if they do think about it, there's this kind of seething sense of vengeance. That when they hear about the destruction of the planet that will be wrought after they die, they think, good. The system that killed me will get killed. Good. It has that kind of, like, crazed lunacy underneath it. And I don't think we need to be ashamed of talking this way, or think that it's hyperbolic to say, right? Like, if these people were capable of rational thought, if they were capable of being rational people, if they were capable of basic empathy, if they were capable of basic compassion, they would be ringing the bell. They would be the ones that would be standing up, being like, hey, whoa, wait a minute. Whoa, climate change. Whoa, climate change. Big red bell. Bing, 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 bing. Hey, wait a minute. Instead of, like, spending $44 billion on Twitter, right? Instead of spending a whole bunch of money on, like, pedophile islands and yachts and shooting yourself into space and, like, Taylor Swift tours and all this kind of dumb shit, right? The billionaires themselves, if they had any capacity for empathy, compassion, or reason at all, they would be the ones who would be ringing the bell. Why is it that Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates are not leading major coalitions and funding huge initiatives in their own political systems? It's because they're psychopaths and they don't care, right? It doesn't matter to them. It's irrelevant to them. They don't care about basic human suffering, right? In fact, they might get off on it. So, like, the idea that we're supposed to venerate these rich psychopaths who are obviously destroying the planet is childish at best and psychotic at worst. Yeah. Low observable goat has nailed this. We look at working people who hoard stuff like old newspapers or whatever as having issues, but if you hoard $1 billion+ dollars, weird dudes on the internet will defend you. Yeah. Have I ever read the book From Zero to One, wrote with Blake Masters, fascist GOP politician? No, I haven't. Many people who are rich believe they got no real power to change a meaningful way. Yeah. Which is so ridiculous. Like, it is. It's ridiculous. Like, Peter Thiel is one of the major driving forces that got Donald Trump elected, right? It's just that Peter Thiel's idea of what significant change is psychotic, right? Peter Thiel's idea of what significant change is he wants immortality for himself. So it's like his expectations might be a little high, you know? Just a touch high, a little self-involved. Like, the following graphics provide a longer-term context for our current warming. First, look back over the last 22,000 years, highlighting the Holocene climactic optimum, the broad flat area. A warm period averaging 0.5% Celsius over the pre-industrial reference. Crucial elements of human expansion and development of agriculture and civilization occurred during this period. XKCD also has fantastic temperature timelines that I'm not going to try to fit into this post. Click and you'll see why. I've seen this, actually. This is actually really brilliant, right? This is a really brilliant, and I will show it in a second. But check this out, right? For the losers, right, the climate change denialist losers who are like, well, your data only goes back to 1860. That's not on a longer timeline, right? The Earth goes through cycles, right? The Earth goes through cycles. Well, here's 20,000 BC, right? And here's a warming period, right? Which, look, it went through a warming period, right? Warming period, right? Here's a normal warming period, and then here's a spike, like a massive spike, right here, right where my mouse cursor is. Right there, just a massive, boink, huge spike that seems to happen right when we start pouring pollution into the atmosphere. Here's the temperature range. This box right here, that's the temperature range during all of human civilization. Humans have been alive for this box. Right? The Holocene period, the warming period, right, is right here. Plateaus, in fact, starts to decline. And then suddenly, boom, huge spike. Right when we start pouring CO2 into the atmosphere. We can extend the view back through. And look at this. Okay, this is even better. So this is like 20,000. We can extend this view back through 800,000 years of Earth cycling in and out of ice ages. Like up and down. And there's that natural cycle that climate change denialists will insist is what defines everything. Right? Here's that natural cycle, right? Natural cycle, and then look. Goes up, and then human civilization starts, and then, oh my god, and then it spikes right up. Oh my god. And lastly, a look back at 500 million years at Earth's climate history. Within about 25 years, we'll be entering a temperature realm not seen since the Pliocene 3 million years ago. Right? It's going to spike right up. I'm going to save this. This is a good one. Thanks, Jib Jabby. Good to see you. Milo is an adorable comfort in the face of the apocalypse. Right now, he's being very infuriating. Because all he wants to do is eat food now. And it doesn't matter how much I feed him. Like, he's because he's gotten blind and, like, deaf, like, his senses have dulled quite a lot, but I think his taste has not. And so all he wants to do is eat. He's just constantly begging for food. He's doing it right now. He's just sitting there staring at me, being like, feed me, like I'm starving him or something. Like, dude, you've had all your food. You're a good boy. Warming factors. There are 3 significant greenhouse gases warming our planet, and several natural cycles that can amplify or moderate temperature swings. The 3 main greenhouse gases in order of importance are CO2, carbon dioxide, CH4, methane, and N2O, nitrous oxide. Monthly updated CO2 measurements from the Mauna Loa Hawaii Observatory are available here. Zach Labe is a climate scientist at Princeton who regularly posts excellent updated graphics on Twitter, Mastodon, and on his personal webpage. I highly recommend following Zach and utilizing some of the outstanding graphics he produces. Since 1984, rising temperature, right? Rising methane, rising nitrous oxide, right? About 55% of newly emitted CO2 is absorbed into the oceans or by plants and soil. So the atmospheric measurements we see here are the remaining 45% that mixes into the atmosphere. The carbon cycle regularly circulates CO2 out of the atmosphere, into the soil and oceans, and back into the atmosphere again. So individual CO2 molecules do not just sit long-term in the atmosphere, but the carbon cycle does not remove CO2. It simply circulates it around. So the concentration of atmospheric CO2 remains elevated for a long time, on the order of 300 to 1,000 years. For any practical concerns to living humans, we can simply treat anthropogenic CO2 as permanent. CO2 emissions have been of global significance since the Industrial Revolution, commonly cited as beginning around 1750, but it is staggering to realize how trivial the early years actually were. The following graph divides total, cumulative, fossil fuel CO2 emissions into quartiles. We see that 50% of total CO2 emissions from fossil fuels were emitted in just the last 28 years, and 75% were emitted in the last 50 years. This is the real-world impact of an economy based on exponential growth. Can't imagine what's going on, guys. Can't imagine what's going on. It's almost as though polluting the planet has consequences. Can't have you barking your head off, dude. I'm in the middle of a stream. Come say hello, okay, buddy? Come say hello to everybody. Hey, here's Milo. Hey, here's Milo. Hey, here's Milo. He's a good boy. He just wants food. He just wants food. He just wants to eat all the food. He just wants to eat eats the food. He just wants to eat the food. Just all the food. The food. But here's the thing, Omnicidal. He doesn't want to walk and exercise, right? Going for a walk is like the last thing he wants to do. He only goes for walks because he needs to go have poos, right? That's all. He just needs to go have a poo, and he knows it, and so he wants to go for a walk to have a poo, right? The crowd is pleased. Yes, he's a good little boy. He's a good little boy, and he's being quite a little schmizmar right now. Yes, he's being very energetic. He's being very, very energetic. Eric I don't know if I've ever seen you here before, but this is a very strong first comment. I'm a stranger online, but I claim Milo as my baby. Oh, God. You guys are going to make me start using Milo. Give us bread and Milo. Oh, I know. I know, buddy. Yeah. You hear how much he loves you, right? You hear how much he loves you guys? This is for you. This is for all the people out there looking for love. He's not right. He's not right. He's not right. There you go. Songs from Milo. Okay, buddy. Okay. You can have some treats. You gotta calm down, though, dude. You gotta calm down. You're just, like, losing your little mind. Because you're a cute little pug. And all you want is food and treats. I get it. Okay. Oh, well, that's very nice, Eric. I'm just happy anybody's watching, honestly. Thank you so much. To continue the article, I am a millennial, and nearly 2/3 of total cumulative CO2 emissions from human use of fossil fuels has been released within my lifetime. Charts by Neil Kay of UK Met Office. You can follow him on Twitter. Wow, I didn't actually realize this. Like this I didn't realize. Percentage of global fossil fuel emissions since 1751 occurring in my lifetime. If you are 30, it's more than 50%. If you are 50, it's about 75%. If you are 85, it's about 90%. So capitalism is murdering us because of its need to grow exponentially, right? It needs to commit to exponential growth, right? John, you would make a pathetic politician if you would get concessions that easy, but he's a little pug. You got to give concessions to little pugs. Below is a breakdown of the primary fossil fuel CO2 sources from global carbon process, right? Annual fossil CO2 emissions global. Cement, gas, oil, coal. Like, I don't know what it's going to take, man. Like, I think we're going to have, like, we're going to lose, like, huge sections of usable land, right? Like, that's where it's actually going to go. Like, we're going to, I really do think, like, a big one is going to be when the New York subway system becomes unusable. That's going to be a big one. Like, I've been saying it a lot recently, and there's something funny about it. I don't know what it is, but there's just something funny about a bunch of New Yorkers just really shitting on climate change denialists. Just being like, hey, what are you talking about? There's no climate change. What are you talking about? Oh, I'm from New York, right? There's just like no way that New Yorkers are going to tolerate any of that nonsense talk once their subway system becomes unusable, right? Like they're going to experience flooding on a level they've never experienced before, and it's just going to wipe their subway system out. So it's just going to be hilarious. Like, and I'm drowning here. Like, I'm skipping huge sections of this article because it's just, like, very technical. And I really am in it for just the charts, right? Another major difference is the emission sources. Methane comes primarily from wetlands, and one of the biggest concerns for future emission increases is thawing of Arctic ice and permafrost, which currently contains enormous amounts of frozen methane. Measurements of fossil fuel methane emission are also highly suspect, with significant underreporting. Wetlands, right? Natural, agriculture, energy, waste, other. Methane levels have increased from a pre-industrial level of approximately 750 parts per billion to 1,920 parts per billion. So almost doubled, right? Using the, we can convert that to an equivalent of CO2 of about 1.1 parts per million. This is helpful when looking at projections from a climate scientist about what happens if we double CO2. We can simply add up the observed CO2 increase and the converted CO2 from methane to get our total global warming impact. Like, what I really want to hear from these guys is like, what's this going to do? Like, what's the impacts going to be? That's what I'd really love to start hearing from these guys, because the impacts are going to be like right now I'm preaching to the choir, right? Like, I think that you guys, like, right? The solar cycle is a regular and predictable 11-year cycle of sunspot activity related to the reversal of the sun's polarity. The intensity can vary significantly, and the current cycle is already far exceeding predicted activity levels within 2 years still to go before it reaches its maximum. Straight up we go. Just like, whoop, whoop. I know, Milo. Arctic ice has steadily dwindled in size. Arctic sea ice extent. See this big blue line, right? You see how it's going? Like, we go through a nice little cycle. Record low year. So we're having record heat, record low Arctic ice, and there's still people walking around pretending like this isn't happening. I just don't know how people, like, tie their shoes in the morning. Like, how do people actually get on with this, right? Like, I feel like we've entered a real, like, 1 + 1 = 2, right? Like, hey, hold on. I'd like to read this. I can recall hearing the term global cooling for the first time in the early 2000s, and I immediately dismissed it as right-wing climate denier propaganda, and I never looked into it. The fossil fuel industry made a point of emphasizing global cooling. Turns out it's an important feature of climate scientists, and ignoring it may be the biggest mistake we ever make. The simplest way to present this is that there are some results of human industrial activity that create warming influences and some that create cooling influences. When you add them all together, you get the net impact on climate. In the chart on the left, you can see several types of aerosols listed: stratospheric, tropospheric, and indirect effects. These are essentially air pollution, with two of the biggest sources being coal burning and electrical power plants and diesel exhaust. This is like that Futurama episode with the ice cube, right? And climate change, we just need to cool the planet, right? Yeah, in my city, we just got the big snowfall we usually have in winter. Yeah, we had a pretty big snowfall here a couple of days ago, too. Air pollution kills millions of people every year, across approximately 100,000 in the U.S. alone. It's been estimated that fossil fuel air pollution is responsible for 1 in 5 deaths globally. Sulfates and other pollutants also cause acid rain. At the same time, these suspend air pollution particles make cloud tops brighter, creating a reflective shield in the atmosphere that bounces incoming solar radiation back out into space. This shielding effect protects us from as much as half of global warming. Hansen refers to this as our Faustian bargain, because we've essentially sold out our future for short-term gains. Sound familiar? The critical point to identify here is that unlike greenhouse gases, aerosols do not persist in the atmosphere. As soon as we stop creating air pollution, the normal cycles of cloud formation and precipitation will wash the aerosols out of the atmosphere within months. Eventually, modern civilization is going to collapse. When that happens, the aerosol masking effect will end immediately, and an already catastrophic situation will become orders of magnitude worse within a single year. The danger of this cannot be overstated. As soon as economic activity collapses, global warming will increase by as much as a full 1 degree Celsius. Like, come on, right? Like, we're totally fucked, you guys. Like, we're totally fucked. I have no idea why anybody participates in modern society. I have no idea why we're still doing this shit. Everybody just wake up and go to your job. La, 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 la. Like, what are you talking about? It's just so fucking embarrassing. The paragraph below is excerpted from a report. Note that warming caused by a loss of aerosols begins immediately, with an accelerated rate of warming lasting for several years. As a consequence, in idealized ESM studies that assume an instantaneous removal of all anthropogenic or fossil fuel-related emissions, a rapid change in aerosol levels occurs, leading to large increases in G-stat, with the rate of warming lasting for several years. Similarly, the thermal inertia causes the pulse emissions of SLCFs to have a significant effect on surface temperatures, even after 10 years. In summary, for SLCFs with a short lifetime, for example months, the response in surface temperature occurs strongly as soon as a sustained change in emissions is implemented and continues to grow for a few years, primarily due to thermal inertia in the climate system. Near its maximum, the response slows down but will then take centuries to reach equilibrium. For SLCFs with longer lifetimes, for example a decade, a delay equivalent to their lifetime comes in addition to the delay due to the thermal inertia. Like, we're fucking totally fucked. Like, it's crazy how fucked we are. For decades, this area has been kept relatively cool by sulfur emission from ships. This changed in 2020. Generation Y Me, thank you so much for the donation. I really do appreciate it. Good opportunity to say like, share, subscribe. Come celebrate the apocalypse with me. That seems to be all we can do now, is just enjoy the decline, because, like, we're not doing anything about it, right? Okay, climate change, another conspiracy. There's an immediate ban. We don't need to tolerate this sort of flat earther bullshit in the chat. Bye-bye, flat earther. Bye-bye, climate change denialist. You're too stupid to talk to. Okay, go read a book. Like literally seek out this article, right? Read literally anything. right? If you're going to come in here and do your flat earther nonsense, you get the fuck out of here. Bye-bye, loser. In 2018, the International Maritime Organization passed a new rule on shipping fuels aimed at reducing air pollution. The rule specifically targeted sulfur emissions and came into force in 2020. It aims to reduce maritime shipping SOx emissions by 77%. Excellent discussion and graphics on shipping fuel change here by Simmons. Volcanoes. Global effects of Mount Pinatubo. Volcanoes aren't necessarily helpful, though. Generation, you donated $5 and said, just came in for a relaxing break, and I got it hearing how the world will end because of capitalism. Good night, everybody. That's right, bud. That's right. Just enjoy the decline, right? Just enjoy the decline. Eric writes, in 2021 or 2022 in my home state, Texas, over 150 people froze to death because of an unprecedented intense cold. Texas government chose not to prevent that in advance. Yeah, I mean, look, we're ruled by psychopaths who do not care about this issue. They don't care. Omnicidal tendency. Yeah, my home state had record low snow. Yeah, my home province of Manitoba experienced a drought over the winter. It's going to have a massive effect on crops, right? And we don't care. We don't give a shit. Net zero and other myths. A short glossary to clarify several very similar sounding terms. ECS, equilibrium climate sensitivity, is the eventual temperature that will be caused by doubling of atmospheric CO2. ESS, Earth system sensitivity, is basically the same thing, but includes all the slow feedbacks fully playing out. Oh, God. I just feel like I'm watching a total train wreck. I feel like I'm watching a total train wreck. And everybody loves it, right? Everybody loves it. Nobody cares, right? Everybody's a huge fan of what's going on. What does the IPCC say? The concept of negative emissions was first introduced in the 2014 IPCC AR5 report and forms the foundation for net zero. Net zero basically says we can keep emitting CO2 from fossil fuels now and clean it up later with negative emissions technology that currently does not exist at relevant scale, while at the same time slowly transitioning to a mostly fossil fuel-free global economy. Net zero is what made it possible to claim to meet the 2015 Paris Agreement goal of limiting global warming to under 2% by 2100. CO2 emission budgets are developed using projections for these future negative emissions capabilities, and the total budget is then sliced up and divided out amongst nations. Problems with the narrative, you guys. The assumptions. The IPCC includes only a limited number of fast feedbacks and does not include warming from other climate change feedbacks, like loss of albedo from melting ice, which are assumed to operate on too slow of a scale to be relevant. However, the extreme rapid rate of change, reflected in the endless stream of faster-than-expected climate news updates, indicates that slow feedbacks may not be as slow as we'd like. Hansen has an excellent, thorough discussion of fast and slow feedbacks and climate change in a nutshell, right here, and repeatedly makes the point that slow feedbacks are already coming into play right now, and that some feedbacks are excluded simply because there is not sufficient confidence on response time, but that we can and should still incorporate these slow feedbacks into our planning scenarios, which the IPCC does not do. It makes an optimistic assumption of 3 degrees, citing a very likely range of 2 to 5 degrees. Even a very small increase to the selected ECS value can have a significant impact on model outputs. It assumes a minimum value for aerosol cooling effect and does not model any scenario that match the current reality. And most importantly, the IPCC insists on prioritizing model output over the paleoclimate record. Hansen harps on this point constantly, writing in storms of my grandchildren. I realized that climate sensitivity was in the process of being nailed down, rigorously and accurately defined by the paleoclimate information discussed in this chapter. Of course, even today it is possible to find scientists and publish papers concluding that climate sensitivity is quite uncertain. A common approach is to calculate the expected warming of the past century based on assumed climate forcings. Then, because of uncertainties in actual forcings, conclude that climate sensitivity is only constrained to lie somewhere within a large range, say 2 to 8 degrees Celsius for doubled carbon dioxide. That logic is a case of failing to see the forest for the trees. Our knowledge is not based on the dullest instrument in our tool bag. Rather, it is based on the sharpest, most discriminating information we can muster. By the dullest instrument in our tool bag, Hansen is referring to climate models. The sharpest instrument is the paleoclimate record. In Climate Change in a Nutshell, Hansen writes, the most relevant tools in the scientific toolbox are 1, Earth's paleoclimate history, which contains information about how Earth responded to climate forcings in the past, and 2, modern observations of how Earth is responding to a natural and human-made climate forcing, and then 3, climate models. Oh, Bread Bunny, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the donation. I appreciate that. I really do. Good opportunity to say like, share, subscribe, right? Plus, if you donate to the Patreon, it gets you into the thing. Please tell people I exist. That's the most important part. Tell people I exist. Tell the world I exist. I'm trying, goddammit, to spread this thing, and I'm trying to just create a space where we can actually have serious conversations about the reality of what we're experiencing. Because I think that it's easy for people to feel like they're isolated, and it's easy for people because it's a system that designs itself that way to isolate you. Well, you're not isolated. You're not isolated. And guess what? You're probably not going to find somebody who's further to the left than me, right? Except for like Mao himself, right? So please tell people I exist. Yeah, we're all in this together. Like, world record temperature anomaly. Look at this. Like, just boop, right up. Climate models are fantastic at predicting long-term trends, but we absolutely cannot rely on them to predict near-term civilization-threatening extreme events. One of the keystones of IPCC projections is the notion that as soon as we stop emitting CO2, then the Earth will stop warming. Zeke Housefather is an IPCC author and one of the primary proponents of this position, and can often be found on Twitter arguing on this very topic. This is a recently developed position, supported by one 2008 paper, which relies on a bit of sleight of hand in order to bend a half-truth into a foundation of the entire IPCC narrative. The half-truth is that if net zero is achieved, the oceans and land will indeed absorb some CO2 from the atmosphere, slightly decreasing the cumulative GHG load. The first falsehood is the proposition that this will offset the many positive feedbacks in play. Natural sinks would have to offset not just CO2, but also methane and other GHGs. The second and much larger falsehood is that net zero is simply not possible, as detailed in section 4.3.4. Not even in the remotest way. But it is the only scenario that allows IPCC to write a report that still has living humans at the end of this century. Dude, this report, you know what's crazy about what I'm reading right now? And what's like I'm constantly in this just like with this, is that he's just sitting here being like, very technical mathematics, 1 + 1 = 2, and if we look at the graph here, we can see, and this is why all human life will be exterminated by the end of the century. And I'm just like, brah! Oh! Like I'm in a boxing match, and the guy is just in front of me, and he's like a polite-looking British man, and he's just going like pap, and he's like just he's hitting my head, right? And but it's just like pap, 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 and I'm just sitting here being like, this is nothing. This is nothing. This guy's got nothing. This guy's got nothing. And then all of a sudden, he just like pulls this hand back, and then just cranks me right in the nose. And it feels like a nuclear explosion going off in my face. That's what reading this feels like. And then, and while I'm reading this absolutely devastating climate change report, I got to deal with simps and losers coming into the Twitch, trying to defend the psychopaths causing these problems, and literally denying that it exists in the first place. Like, it's wild. It's like totally fucking wild to watch just the absolute depths of the depravity of these people as they actively argue in favor of the destruction of their own children and themselves. It's just psycho. Even Housefather is forced to reveal the game towards the end of the article. The study featured in this piece all look at the effects of zero emission scenarios today or in the next few decades. If, however, zero emissions were to occur later in the century, there is the potential to lock in more carbon cycle feedback processes, such as melting permafrost, than under current global temperature levels. I've said it over and over and over again, man. I've said it over and over and over and over again, man. I'm dead convinced that we're going to get the Kraken. That beneath the ocean that we don't explore and we know nothing about, there lives Krakens. They're down there, man. And they're going to come up and they're going to start messing with us. Because we're just going to destroy all their food. Right? We're going to destroy all their food. And they're going to come up and they're going to be like, where's the food? And then they're going to start messing with our shipping. And they're going to start destroying our ships. I'm so here for it, man. I'm definitely here for it. Carbon dioxide removal. Net zero requires massive scale implementation of negative emissions technologies that don't exist. That should be a red flag. Peter Kalmus, a climate scientist at NASA. Oh, I know. You're so playful, and you want me to play with you. I know. Sorry, guys. I feel like this particular stream is like schizophrenic. It's just like so schizophrenic. I'm like talking about this absolutely deadly, devastating shit, and my puppy is just like, play with me, play with me, play with me. Peter Kalmus, a climate scientist at NASA, has called CDR, climate dioxide removal, magic fairy dust. We're used to seeing computer technology advance at an exponential rate, and it's easy to be complacent and think, of course we'll make magic technology in time. But CDR means industrial machinery that is nothing like transistors and pixels. Okay, so how big a scale are we talking about here? At 3 minutes 35 seconds in this video interview with Dr. Hugh Hunt of Cambridge, he describes it this way. We don't do anything on this planet at that scale. We don't manufacture food at that scale. We don't mine iron ore on that scale. We don't even produce oil, coal, or gas on that scale. The largest direct capture facility on Earth is capable of removing 4,000 tons of CO2 per year, compared to 2022's emissions of 40.5 billion tons. The facility is able to remove less than 0.00001% of annual emissions. Our current CDR capabilities are quite literally negligible. Hansen writes in a nutshell, implausibility of negative emissions on the required scale is readily apparent. Commenting further on the cost of these activities, the cost in a single year of closing the gap between reality and the IPCC scenario that limits climate change to plus 1.5 degrees Celsius is already about $1 trillion. And that is without the cost of transporting and storing the CO2. For reference, $1 trillion is about the annual military budget of the United States. Decarbonizing. The other key component of net zero is to decarbonize electricity and transportation by transitioning the globe to a completely renewable electric grid and eliminating fossil-powered vehicles. That way, the CDR industry can work on offsetting the remaining fossil CO2 emissions from sectors like agriculture and mining that cannot be easily transitioned to electric power and begin chipping away at the 1.1 trillion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. At every point in history, when renewable energy sources have been developed and added into our energy grid, that new renewable energy has been in addition to fossil fuel sources. Renewable energy has never replaced fossil energy because that would require government regulation. Cheap energy supply encourages more energy-intensive activities, and overall, demand goes up. This phenomenon is known as Jevons paradox. Ignoring it leads to many people endorsing energy policies that have the opposite of their intended effect. The task then is to decarbonize a global energy mix that looks like this. Global primary energy consumption by source. Coal, oil, traditional biomass, like wood. We're so totally fucked, you guys. Like, it's incredible how fucked we are. What's often ignored in this discussion is the quantities of metals, especially copper, and other materials needed to produce such an incredible amount of renewable energy components. Dr. Simon Mikko of the Finnish Geological Survey gave a lecture going over global availability of materials needed for a renewable grid transition, and has found every single critical metal to be vastly below required reserves. The Earth contains less than 20% of the copper needed to produce just the first generation of renewables. A generation refers to the typical 20-year lifespan of most power generation components. About 20% of the required nickel, less than 2.5% of the required lithium. A few key quotes from Dr. Mikko's presentation. The idea of growth economics is about to be phased out whether we like it or not. The economic model behind materialism, consumerism, and the social constructs associated with that will have to go. We've got no choice there. The purpose of this work is to show the shortcomings of the existing paradigm. What will happen is we've got to make a better plan. Once we understand our true boundary conditions, what will we really do? The way I convinced my management was pointing out in 2024 or 2025, the captains of industry in Europe who are making electric vehicles and their batteries will turn to the geological surveys of Europe and say, why did you not tell us about this very obvious problem? Capitalism, capitalism. You won't buy it if it won't work. So we gotta lie to you. Yeah, this'll totally work. Look at this solution that's definitely a solution that'll 100% work. Don't tell them we don't have enough of it. Don't tell them we don't have enough of it. Bye, bye, bye. Yeah, bye-bye. A movement in oil markets of 5% is massive. This is a change in demand from 700% to 4,000% in these metals that will be required in the coming 2 decades. If it were to be achievable, this would be the largest change in demand in metals in all of human history. It's never happened. People are suffering some delusions about what is possible in the mining sector. What we're proposing to do with the energy transition is you will increase the wedge in gray by 10 times. It's just so stupid, right? Like, it's so stupid. Like, we've gotten so stupid. Like, it's amazing how stupid we've gotten. The energy system in the future will require the extraction and movement of a quantity of materials equal to or greater than the quantities of material that humanity extracts, moves, and grows for all other purposes combined. Dude, I'm like, I had a bunch of people on Twitch for just a minute, and I think they were watching me read this, and just the horror, right? Anybody else just filled with like an overwhelming sense of total horror? We have no plan, and on top of that, all of the planning that we have done has been for nothing, right? Absolutely nothing. It's pointless. It's stupid. We're dumb. I hope this article ends with some solutions. I hope I get to see what these guys think we should be doing. Because I have a plan, right? I've got thoughts. In simplistic terms, the world will be short copper in a year or two. Copper does not have a substitute. It's not replaceable. You can pick any metal. There's a shortage of all metals in coming years. The average is about 16 years to find and open a new mine globally. The world is not even investing 10% of what is required in global mining expansion in order to meet the aspirations. We're short on midterm investing, and that's the 2 to 5 year time frame in all energy markets, which translates into pretty bullish price impacts on commodities for a very long time. How long it lasts will relate more to politics than what engineers can accomplish. To conclude this subsection, once you understand that CDR is impossible, a renewable grid is impossible, carbon zero transportation is impossible, and therefore net zero is impossible, you understand that the purpose of the IPCC report is simply narrative control. Baldy McNosehair with a $10 donation. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Baldy McNosehair. You know what? Let's take a break from this for just 1 second to answer Baldy McNosehair's question. He spent $10 to ask me this. Random question. If the Liberals lose the next election, what do you think Chrystia Freeland is going to do next in her career? I think she's going to join NATO with her Nazism with her. Yeah, that seems likely. Right? I mean, that's just I think you got it, Baldy. Like, I think that she's been eyed up with NATO. I think there's been NATO conversations. I think she fits right in with her Nazi heritage and her Nazi background. I think that's a big reason why she keeps pounding the pulpit on the Nazism, because NATO is like a very pro-Nazi organization, and I think that works in her favor. I don't think that she's going to struggle too hard to find work with organizations like NATO, or with, you know, there's going to be some organization somewhere that wants a Nazi like her, right? So whether she's working for the World Economic Forum or whether she's doing speeches for some, you know, BlackRock organization or something like this, I think you've just got it figured out. I also think it's worth pointing out that the Liberals are probably going to lose the next election, right? Like that. I think people are fed up with the Liberals. I think they're fed up with their inaction and their obvious ineptitude. Even though it's sort of funny because the whole conversation is coming down to the carbon tax. That's what it's all coming down to, is that there's a big conversation happening in Canada about the carbon tax. And it's basically the Conservatives lying about what the carbon tax is going to do and the Liberals overinflating the impact of the carbon tax, right? That's essentially what's going on. Rust on Twitch. You understand that communism is win? I'm the Canadian commie. Communism is win. What is the IPCC? First, the IPCC is not a scholarly body. It's not a scientific academy. It's a political body, an office of the United Nations. The I in IPCC stands for intergovernmental. It does not conduct original research on climate, but performs essentially a literature review, publishing its findings in regular assessment reports. The IPCC's contribution in the various modeled pathways and global migration plan that it develops. Leaked draft documents from scientists working within the IPCC have revealed the influence of political lobbyists over the final texts of the IPCC summary reports. Delegates from Brazil and Argentina successfully removed any mention of the negative impacts of meat on the environment. They also removed recommendations that people in wealthy countries reduce their meat consumption and shift their diets to include more plant-based foods. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's delegates make changes throughout the report to position carbon capture and storage as a climate solution on par with renewable energy, as well as removing calls for phasing out all fossil fuels. Omnicidal, I know, you're a dangerous person, man. You're a dangerous person, what can I say? Kevin Anderson is a climate scientist and professor who's been outspoken for years about the influence of global elites, commonly referred to the Davos Group after the annual World Economic Forum meetings in Davos, Switzerland. He co-authored this 2022 article titled, "We Must Disrupt Davos Culture to End Decades of Failure on Climate," which summarized his 2021 research paper on the same target. From the article, Whilst the expert community may be working quite impartially, it does so within highly constrained boundaries, imposed directly through funding and indirectly through prevailing hierarchies. The prevailing narrative is that we now have to urgently harness society's economic and technological powers to gain control of the climate crisis and safely navigate the so-called Anthropocene. Central to this view is that we have no time to replace vested interests and question existing norms and power structures. In stark contrast, our recent paper concludes that it is exactly these interests, norms, and structures that continue to be key impediments to meeting our climate commitments. At 4 minutes in this interview, Anderson states, "The Davos cluster has set the current narrative, and it is supported by the expert community. The only way forward is going to be through different structures of power. What these CDR technologies allow us to do is to not make significant changes today. It allows us to maintain the current narrative. In just a handful of years, this way of thinking has completely colored much of the NGO community, the academic community, and the journalistic community. In academia, virtually all of these scenarios that we assume and develop now seem to use the language of negative emissions or CDR as if these things existed. By using the language repeatedly, day after day after day, we have almost made them material as if they are real. They are just words of things that might occur in the future, but we assume that you can already buy them off the shelves and you can put them into your scenarios. This is so widespread, so ubiquitous, that we are now unable to come up with alternative narratives from within the academic community, particularly the senior academics who are locked into the existing narrative. Again, hammering the main point, at 15:15, the expert community currently just reinforces Davos. In this recent article, Anderson calls IPCC climate modeling as damaging to the agenda of cutting emissions as Exxon was in misleading the public about climate science. Noam Chomsky is most well known for his theory of manufacturing consent. In this 1996 interview clip, Chomsky makes the very important point that it's not just that journalists or scientists are deliberately lying or actively promoting a conspiracy to deceive and mislead the public. They're likely acting to the best of their abilities. Their narrative shaping occurs in the hiring process. If you believed something different, you wouldn't be sitting where you're sitting. That is the way to understand IPCC reports. These are Davos narratives to ensure that elite power is not challenged, regardless of what climate catastrophe may soon occur, and scientists are chosen to write these reports based on their agreement with the Davos narrative. 4.5. Distractions. Dude, I'm loving this. I gotta tell you, I know that some of you are probably dipping in and being like, this is horrifying. This is just like horrible. I'm loving it. I'm here for this. I am here to witness the end of days. Do you understand? I am here to witness the apocalypse and face my creator saying, I did it. I did the thing that you sent me here to do. I watched it happen. Look at it. Look at what you wrought. Look, witness, bear witness, because it's just ridiculous. Like, humanity is a mistake. We didn't work. Next iteration. Hopefully by the time climate change starts really blowing up, we'll have AI robots, and the AI robots like Wall-E will take over. And yeah, Resist is nailing it. We can't deny climate science anymore, but we can push ineffective solutions and claim that everything will be fine. Exactly. It's just another form of denialism, right? It's just another form of denialism. Nobody wants to acknowledge that we have to shut the power off, right? No one wants to do that. I'd rather have an asteroid than a solar eclipse on April 8th. Oh, yeah, everybody's yammering on about April 8th, and I don't understand why April 8th is in the narrative at all. Like it feels like a very much like the Mayans predicted kind of moment, and it's just okay. I guess it'd be cool if something happened on the 8th. You will frequently see references in climate news to tipping points, and it is worth taking a moment to explain what tipping points are and aren't. It always seems like some tipping point is getting closer and closer, but hasn't passed yet, which means there's still time to fix things, right? Tipping points apply to individual subsystems. There is not one grand tipping point controlling climate change. There is a tipping point for the Amazonian rainforest, for Iceland's ice sheet. There are separate tipping points for several major ice sheets in Antarctica, for Arctic permafrost methane, for the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, which stabilizes Europe's climate, for coral reefs, etc., etc. The way I like to explain it is to imagine a person putting in a giant pizza oven. There will be individual tipping points for when various different systems fail. The lungs will have their own tipping point. The skin, the brain, the liver. Focusing on individual tipping points is a distraction. The only thing that matters is getting the person out of the oven as quickly as possible. Letting them stay in the oven and closely monitoring while their liver function is well within normal range would be insanity. The same is true with the Earth's climate. Precisely which individual system collapse or don't, and in which order, isn't the point. The point is we've placed 1.1 trillion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. There's no way to remove it. And it's going to make the Earth unlivable within the lifetimes of most of us alive today. Milankovitch cycles are another item to just briefly touch on, as you may see it mentioned by climate deniers. Milankovitch cycles are regular changes to the Earth's orbit that influence Earth's climate on the order of tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of year cycles. Yes, they're a real thing. No, they don't matter at all to our current anthropogenic warming, which is occurring practically instantaneously by comparison. Possibly the biggest and definitely the most pernicious distraction is overpopulation. The disparity in emissions and overall consumption between wealthy and poor populations is so massive as to defy comprehension. Climate change, past and present, is caused by the global wealthy. From Oxfam, the poorest 50% is only responsible for around 10% of total lifestyle consumption emissions. Richest 10% responsible for almost half. We got to start throwing people in jail, man. Like we do. We just got to start throwing people in jail. Like we just need to start arresting people and putting them in prison and just saying like, yeah, you're a polluter. Bye. Goodbye. Right? Like, why are we doing this? What are we doing here? It's so fucking absurd, and it's so obvious what the problem is. But we've got simps and climate change deniers coming in here and pretending like everything's totally fine. These disparities exist even within developed nations. The chart below shows the carbon footprint of various income groups within the EU. The top 1% emit more CO2 from the food they eat than the poorest 5% emit for their whole lifestyles. The top 1% CO2 emissions solely from air travel are approximately equal to the top 10% for total footprint. Like bottom 5%, bottom 50%, middle 40%, top 10%, top 1%. Incarcerate these people. Take these people and put them in prison cells. Jail them. Like, jail them. I don't understand. It's just, like, ridiculous. It would be trivially easy to feed a global population of 10 billion vegetarians, while even half that number of meat eaters is enough to destroy the planet. Yeah, I love it. I love that we're all like, we couldn't possibly all go vegetarian, so what we'll do is grow enough vegetables to feed the entire cattle population. Yeah, the algorithm, population control, yeah. Well, we don't need to worry about population control here in the West. We're in a population decline. Like, we're in a major population decline here in the West. Like, we don't need to do population control. And I also have opinions about, like, All of the studies have shown that our population went up and has plateaued, and that we're actually set to see a decline in global population, right? So I'm not actually that worried about overpopulation. And overpopulation is not a problem. Problems are things for which you propose solutions. If you have 10 people in a boat and one person weighs 1,500 pounds while the other 9 people weigh around 100 pounds each, is the boat overpopulated? Using the language of overpopulation sets the target on poor, low emitters and enables fascist genocidal fantasies of the rich, who would love to throw the other 9 people out of the boat. Using the language of overconsumption sets the target where it should rightly be, on the wealthy high emitters. Overconsumption is the problem. Yeah, this is the problem. Overpopulation is not the problem. This is the problem. Jail these people. Put them in prison cells. Like, jail them. It's like, start passing laws that say you are allowed this much pollution and no more. And if you go over it, you go in a jail cell and we forget where you are. Right? Sorry, Taylor. Sorry, Swifty. Temperature projections. Here we go. Trajectory. The most important paper published in recent years is James Hansen's Global Warming in the Pipeline from December 2022. Hansen, with 14 co-authors, including Leon Simmons, who I've quoted frequently, published this paper before it completed peer review, making the full paper immediately available to the public. I take this as an indication of the extreme urgency of the message within. Improved knowledge of glacial to interglacial global temperature change implies that fast feedback equilibrium climate sensitivity is at least 4% Celsius for doubled CO2, with a likely range of 3.5 to 5.5. Global warming in the pipeline is greater than prior estimates. Eventual global warming due to today's GHG forcing alone after slow feedbacks operate is about 10 degrees Celsius. Note that Hansen's likely range for ECS is entirely above the IPCC's value of 3 degrees Celsius. The paper states flatly, the IPCC AR6 conclusion that 3% is the best estimate for ECS is inconsistent with paleoclimate data. The importance of this cannot be overstated. If we end all CO2 emissions today, the Earth will warm by at least 4 degrees Celsius by 2100, and by 10 degrees Celsius over the next 1,000 plus years. Remember, CDR is impossible. We cannot build the machinery to remove CO2 from the atmosphere at the scale required to make a difference. We are committed to these temperature increases. Going back to the previous topic of fast versus slow feedbacks, the paper states, most climate models are unrealistically insensitive to fresh water injected by melting ice, and also that ice sheet models are unrealistically lethargic in the face of rapid, large climate change. I could make this section much longer by quoting extensively from the paper, but I'll attempt to keep it short and just recommend that everyone should just read at least Hansen's December update, if not the full pipeline paper. If we do some simple projections, based off what we know so far, we're looking at 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2024, over 2 degrees by 2050, 3 degrees by 2075, and at least 4 degrees by 2100. This is what everyone should be planning for. These are global average temperatures, and it is important to emphasize that land warms faster than water, and the northern hemisphere has less water than the southern hemisphere. So the northern hemisphere warms faster than the southern hemisphere. So when we say 1.5 degree global warming, we're talking about 2.2 degrees Celsius on land in the northern hemisphere, with regional variances meaning some particularly vulnerable areas may warm more than others. Dude, wildfire season's just going to get great. I cannot wait for some of these buildings to start burning down. I cannot wait for some of these buildings to start burning down. Reminder, these numbers are based on current CO2 levels already in the atmosphere, as calculated in section 2.1. Allowing even 9 more years of steady emissions worsens the situation by about 15%, 12 years by 20%, and 15 years by 25%. Will Steffen gave some context for 4 degrees Celsius of warming in this short lecture extract. 4 degrees Celsius is the same difference in temperature as from the last ice age to the present. We're talking about a shift as big as between an ice age when mastodons and woolly mammoths were around and humans barely survived. We're talking about the same difference, but not in 5,000 years, in 1 century. In my view, it's impossible to survive that sort of change. That's beyond human physiology. In fact, large mammals as a whole will not do very good. That's a collapse scenario, because physiologically, we can't survive that. Subsequent publication of this article, Hansen has been frantically attempting to calm the outcries sparked by his pipeline paper, saying the temperatures in the paper are not committed. Hansen says not committed because he still believes net zero is possible. The argument goes that ECS-ESS values are computed based on constant atmospheric CO2e concentrations, and that after net zero has been achieved, the natural sink drawdown mechanisms discussed in section 4.3.2 will cause atmospheric CO2 concentrations to go down, therefore lowering the temperature trajectory. Hansen gets the climate science right, but everything else wrong. Net zero is not possible. Further, it is important to remember that the 4 degrees Celsius, 10 degrees Celsius temperatures in the pipeline paper are calculated based on current GHG levels as of the end of 2022, and emissions have still not leveled off. In the years between now and civilizational collapse, we will likely emit far more GHGs than any post-collapse natural sink drawdown could negate. There is no question that 4 degrees Celsius by 2100 is locked in. Hansen's faith in net zero is not remotely realistic. Dude, this is awesome. This is just awesome. Nah, dude, I'm totally here to witness humanity completely eat it. Completely eat it. So someone's asking the question in the Twitch chat, Planet X, what is communism going to do to cool the earth? At this point, no, you don't understand, right? The damage is done, right? Even if we shut off everything, right? If we shut everything off, we were still facing 4 degrees Celsius. So now it's not about what the strategy is to prevent this situation from happening, right? The strategy is how to ensure we minimize the damage to the human population. Because the capitalist solution is to abandon as many people as possible. That's the capitalist solution, is to ensure that millions of people die as fast as possible while the capitalists escape to their bunkers, right? The communist solution is, no, take care of people. Make sure everybody has food. Make sure everybody has shelter. Do what you can in the face of disaster to benefit the maximum amount of people you can. Capitalism, hundreds of millions of people dead. Communism, more people survive. That's the difference, right? Let psychopaths lead, let rational science lead. It's a pretty easy decision to make. The primary message of this section is that the temperature projections just made in section 5.1 are a simplistic representation of change. Real change may not happen smoothly, but can arrive in sudden, catastrophic bursts. These bursts will happen on top of a baseline warming rate already much faster than we are used to from recent memory. In an update from August 2021, Hansen writes, we should expel the global warming rate for the quarter of a century to be, we should expect rather, the global warming rate for the quarter of a century, 2015 to 2040, to be about double the 0.18 Celsius per decade rate during the 1970s and the 2015, unless appropriate countermeasures are taken. Just like, it's wild to know that there are climate change deniers right now, dude. Like, this has a real, like, Noah's Ark quality about it, right? Jahoni, good to see you. Good to see you. Like, really, like the thing I took away from the story of Noah's Ark, right, is that there were people making fun of Noah for building the Ark, and those people drowned, right? So at this stage in the game, I think it's just, we gotta, like, let's all be preppers. Let's become preppers, and, like, let's get serious about it. This very recent study, just published in April 2023, found that over the last 20 years, the atmosphere is warming 5 times as fast as the period from 1961 to 2000. We know that EEI is a measurement of the speed of warming. Below, look at EEI over the last 20 years. Oh, wow. Isn't it funny how every line is going up? The biggest factor influencing the near-term warming rate is the elimination of air pollution, specifically SOx. In a scenario where industrial civilization collapses, the aerosol cooling effect could disappear, resulting in massive warming of 0.5 to 1 degree Celsius within 1 to 2 years. Bro, I just think that's so funny. We have these, like, aerosol cooling effects that are, like, kind of keeping everything. It's like the scene from The Simpsons where Mr. Burns finds out that he has, like, so many diseases that they can't, like, get rammed through, and he's just like, I'm indestructible. This 2014 AGU presentation by Dr. Jim White of the Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research at the University of Colorado Boulder focuses on abrupt change, leading off with the message that in adapting to change, speed kills. At 1330, up until the 1990s, we thought of climate change as mostly gradual, forced primarily by sun-earth changes. Greenland ice cores and ocean sediment cores changed that view. His research indicates that study sites in Greenland experienced past abrupt changes of 5 to 10 degrees Celsius in a single year. On the topic of Arctic Ocean ice, Dr. White states at 2440, what you have now is an Arctic Ocean that's largely made up of 1, 2, 3-year ice. And that's very different from an Arctic Ocean made up of multi-year ice. 1 to 2-year ice is something that can change rapidly. This is a system that's been set up for abrupt change. Another recent study found ice sheets can collapse into the ocean in spurts up to 600 meters, 2,000 feet a day. Some ice sheets in Antarctica include the Doomsday, Thwaites Glacier, could suffer periods of rapid collapse in the near future. Our findings suggest that present-day rates of melting are sufficient to cause short pulses of rapid retreat across flat-bedded areas of the Antarctic ice sheet, including at Thwaites. These past abrupt melting events resulted from CO2 increases tremendously slower than CO2 emission rates today, which are rising faster than any event in Earth's history. Bro. The steady rate of warming is becoming faster and sudden. Catastrophic warming events are absolutely possible. It is dangerously wrong to assume that future warming will be anything like recent past warming. We cannot assume that we have time to adequately prepare for future warming, or that we can simply deal with events as they unfold. I'm so looking forward to seeing the mask off. Like, the capitalists just go fucking totally mask off. At this point, I'm really just here to be like, I told you so, guys. Like, I fucking told you so. These guys are psychopaths. They're total mask off Nazis, right? Risk assessment. The graphic below is taken from this 2022 study titled Exploring Catastrophic Climate Change Scenarios, and correctly highlights the focal role of food, water, and fuel as the metaphorical gallows trapdoor upon which civilization incuriously rests. The paper points out the IPCC has yet to give focused attention to catastrophic climate change. 14 special reports have been published. None covered extreme or catastrophic climate change. From the conclusions section, There is ample evidence that climate change could become catastrophic. We could enter such endgames at even modest levels of warming. Understanding extreme risks is important for robust decision making, from preparation to consideration of emergency responses. This requires exploring not just higher temperature scenarios, but also the potential for climate change impacts to contribute to systemic risk and other cascades. Facing a future of accelerating climate change while blind to worst-case scenarios is a naive risk management at best and fatally foolish at worst. In what lies beneath the author's right, the World Bank reports there is no certainty that adaptation to a 4 degree Celsius world is possible. A 2017 survey of global catastrophic risks by the Global Challenges Foundation found that in high-end climate scenarios, the scale of destruction is beyond our capacity to model, with a high likelihood of human civilization coming to an end. Like, bruh. In the IPCC lexicon, future outcomes are considered unlikely if they lie outside the central 67% of the probability distribution. For many types of risk assessment, however, a 33% chance of occurrence would be very high. The report discusses the deceptive nature of fat tail distributions. How likely, for example, are we to experience a catastrophic 6-degree warming of the globe? Well, the mean warming predicted by models is about 3%, and the standard deviation about 1.5%, so the positive tail, defined as the +2 sigma limit, is about 6 degrees of warming. The likelihood of exceeding that amount of warming isn't 2%, as we would have expected for a bell curve distribution. It's closer to 10%. Risk is computed by multiplying the likelihood of an outcome by its severity. IPCC reports have not given attention to fat tail risk analysis, in part because the reports are compiled using a consensus method. The authors of this paper, titled "Climate Science Needs to Take Risk Assessment Much More Seriously," asks the question, why did the IPCC not long ago produce a risk assessment like that of King et al., 2015? From the conclusion section, for decision makers, climate change is a problem in risk assessment and risk management. It is therefore surprising that the needs and lessons of risk assessment have not featured more prominently in the consideration of priorities for physical climate science, or in the major IPCC assessment reports. This state of affairs is a result of the siloing of climate science between different disciplines, but it has been exacerbated by a widespread view that the job of the IPCC is to provide predictions and projections with a focus on likelihood rather than risk, and that risk assessment is a job for others. The King 2015 risk report quotes a 2012 UK Food Research Partnership report which concluded, "The evidence is not available properly to describe with any certainty how variable weather will impact on food production systems and worldwide trade. But our contention is that we need greater investigation of what they could be, with perhaps greater consideration being given to reasonable worst-case scenarios. Given that the frequency of weather extremes is increasing, the potential for large impacts, and unprecedented ones, is growing." King's report concludes, "The risk of a serious weather-related shock to global food production appears to be increasing rapidly due to climate change. Such an event could have serious implications for the stability of global grain markets and human security in vulnerable countries. First, and perhaps foremost, is to better understand the risks. In particular, we need to better understand the evolving risks of weather-related shocks. The takeaway from this section is that no one is taking risk assessment seriously. The IPCC is not doing risk assessment. The few individual researchers taking the time to investigate it are basically saying, we have no idea how bad a worst-case scenario could be. It is beyond ridiculous that we stand less than 18 months from crossing 1.5 degrees Celsius, and our risk assessments boil down to more research is needed. Food supply. This is what I've been looking forward to right here. This is what I've been looking forward to, right? This is what I've been looking forward to right here. Food supply. Food supply. Ranger Doomer. What an optimistic view, man. Ranger Doomer on Twitch writes, well, at this rate, who knows? Maybe the greenhouse effect will be countered by a nuclear war. There you go. Always look on the bright side of life. There are two distinct vulnerabilities to our food supply. Distribution and production. 6.2.1 Food distribution. The primary near-term threat to human civilization is famine. Americans may think of famine as something that happens elsewhere, not here. This is a mistake. Go to your kitchen cupboard, grab a few items, and look where they're made. Try the same exercise at the grocery store. Capitalism has forced the hyper-specialization of various regions into profitable monocultures, which create single points of failure in the food system. Just one example. 90% of the leafy green vegetables produced in the U.S. from November to March are grown in the Yuma, Arizona area. We import beef from South America and fruits from all over the globe. Staple grains have become just another globally traded commodity like rubber or steel. What this means is that practically nowhere in the developed world, and most especially not in the US, can people support themselves on locally produced foods. Farmers' markets are in no way capable of offsetting a major gap in imported foods. We are completely dependent on a highly complex global logistics chain in order to eat. The famed efficiency of capitalism. Pears grown in Argentina, packed in Thailand. Duh. Like, what are you talking about? We've seen in recent years what can happen when the supply chain experiences even minor shocks. Beginning in 2020, we're experiencing a wide variety of product shortages from Chinese factories closing temporarily to protect workers from COVID. We saw massive price spikes on lumber, which lasted 2 years. We saw crops destroyed as distributors couldn't rapidly switch from restaurant supply chains to grocery store supply chains. From April 2020, farmers are dumping as many as 3.7 million gallons of milk a day. Here's your capitalist efficiency. A single chicken processor is smashing 750,000 unhatched eggs every week. Capitalist efficiency. The highly comedic 2021 grounding of the container ship Ever Given in the Suez Canal caused supply backlogs. In this interview, George Monbois discusses complex systems theory and its relationships to the vulnerabilities of our food supplies. Some important quotes from the interview. The global food system is beginning to look very much like the global financial system in the run-up to 2008. It's becoming unbelievably concentrated. According to one estimate, 4 companies control 90% of the global grain trade. And those same companies are becoming vertically integrated as well. They're buying into seed, into chemicals, into machinery, into packaging, processing, retailing. They're massive, and they're highly interlinked. Your system is likely to be resilient if no particular nodes within it are dominant. If those nodes are quite weakly connected to each other, and if their behavior is not synchronized, because if that's the case, shocks can't easily be transmitted throughout the whole system, they stop. They're sort of circuit breakers within that system. If you have these super dominant nodes, they become very strongly linked to other super dominant nodes, and they all begin operating in the same way. That is a highly fragile system. Because one thing goes wrong in one node, it can bring down the whole lot. What we're seeing now is these enormous nodes developing. not just big corporations, but also these sort of super exporter nations, particularly ports through which the food is passing and particular choke points. So a huge proportion of global food trade goes through the Suez Canal, or the Panama Canal, or the Straits of Malaysia, or the Turkish Straits, or the Bab el-Mandeb, or the Straits of Hormuz. And you only need a couple of those to go down, and there's very serious trouble. It's not hard to see how the food chain could snap. Commenting on shipping infrastructure improvements, you think, oh, well, that makes it more efficient, so that's good. It makes our food supply more reliable, surely. What that's done is to enable companies to switch from stocks to flows. So they don't hold stocks anymore. It's all just in time. So if that chain snaps, suddenly there isn't any food. Basically, the world's food stocks are at sea at the moment. That is our food stock. And if that gets jammed up for some reason or another, or if the ships don't get loaded in the first place, then instantly that chain is broken. And not only are people going to go hungry immediately, as the shelves just empty overnight, but also you can then see a chain reaction going on through the whole food system, which is exacerbated by speculation. There's massive financial speculation in food now. When they bailed out the banks, you can do that with finance because you can borrow money from the future. You can't borrow food from the future. It literally keeps me awake at night. I wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh Christ, the food supply, this can't be true. But I've been reading these scientific papers now going back 10 years saying, governments, you need to be aware of this. It's really, really scary. This is worse than you could possibly imagine, because if this goes and everyone's ignored it, it's been completely ignored. 6.2.2 Food production. In the spring of 2022, after Russia launched the Ukraine offensive, world grain market watchers were concerned about the inability of Ukrainian farmers to harvest and transport their winter wheat crop to shipping ports for export. Ukraine produces 9% of the world's wheat exports, among a number of other important agricultural products. India stepped up, announcing, "We already have enough food for our people, but our farmers seem to have made arrangements to feed the world," Modi said in April. "We are ready to send the relief tomorrow." Now, those lofty goals have been abandoned, and wheat exports banned as life-threatening heat waves in South Asia stunt output and push local prices to record heights. The move shocked international markets on Monday, all the more since it came just days after India assured the world that the unprecedented heat wave wouldn't impact its export plans. This is only one recent story of many. I highly recommend following Jim Bard on Twitter. Bard, a pseudonym, claims to be a Canadian agricultural industry expert and regularly posts global agricultural news. This thread contains a trove of news articles spanning years. Skim through that thread and you will quickly realize just how lucky we've been recently. How many near misses are happening regularly. The most likely event to trigger a civilizational collapse is what is referred to as a multi-breadbasket failure, from King's Risk Assessment. Food production of the globally most important commodity crops, maize, soybeans, wheat, and rice, comes from a small number of major producing countries. The exposure of a large proportion of global production of the major crops is therefore concentrated in particular parts of the globe, and so extreme weather events in these regions have the largest impact on global food production. Simultaneous extreme weather events in two or more of these regions, creating a multiple breadbasket failure, would represent a serious production shock. However, understanding the covariance of extreme weather events in different production regions is currently under-researched. There is an urgent need to understand the driving dynamics of meteorological teleconnections, such as the El Niño, which may be becoming more extreme, in order to quantify the likelihoods of coincident production shocks in major food-producing regions. Essentially, If one region experiences a major crop failure, that is not the end of the world. Damaging weather events happen all the time, and there is enough supply to handle a one-off regional catastrophe. Simultaneous crop failures are a different matter. As noted in the previous subsection, we do not keep extensive food supplies in storage. Many foods would run out within weeks of the onset of a significant shortage. It is not inconceivable that a significant multi-breadbasket failure could cause 500 million deaths in a single year, including far more deaths in the U.S. than often thought possible. Additionally, demand continues to increase. Demand for food at a global level is increasing faster than yields are growing, leading to increasing pressure on land. Demand growth is driven by population and demographic change and increasing global wealth. In this interview, King discusses the threat of seawater inundation onto crop fields. Once you've been flooded with seawater, that's the end of rice production. There will be no global economy like we know it today once rice production collapses like that. Vietnam will be underwater once a year in 30 years' time. Indonesia, similar. The capital of Indonesia, Jakarta, will not be livable within the next 5 to 10 years because of frequent flooding. And so now Indonesia is talking about moving its capital to higher land. What we're talking about is a period when rice production in that part of the world collapses. Also includes southeast China. Flooding of paddy fields massively happening in just 30 years. We're talking about very urgent problems. We're going to see the collapse of the global economy well before we hit 4 degrees Celsius. This 2021 article describes saltwater intrusion into rice paddies in Cambodia. Last year, Niet Sre's paddy was almost ready to harvest when her 2.5 hectare field became inundated with seawater, wiping out her crops, slashing her main source of income, and destroying her way of life. My paddy was really good by then. The salt water spilled over and it died out. So did other neighbors' rice paddies. Now I'm really concerned that I can't farm anymore, she said. Ironically, food production could be the easiest problem to solve, requiring nothing more than simply switching to plant-based diets, which could reduce agricultural land requirements by 75%. Globally, approximately 45% of crops are grown not for human consumption, but for animal feed and fuels. The proportions are even more striking in the United States, where just 27% of crop calories are consumed directly. Wheat, say, or fruits and vegetables grown in California. By contrast, more than 67% of crops, particularly all the soy grown in the Midwest, goes to animal feed. And a portion of the rest goes to ethanol and other biofuels. Some of that animal feed eventually becomes food, obviously, but it's a much, much more indirect process. It takes about 100 calories of grain to produce just 12 calories of chicken, or 3 calories worth of beef, for instance. Crops grown for food are in the green. For animal feed and fuel. We grow more, in North America, we grow more food for animals than we grow for people. And in Europe, it's not even close. God, there's something wrong with us. There's just something fucking wrong with us. Many of the world's poorest countries eat very little meat. The same wealthy high emitters who promote the Davos narrative also consume the most meat. So it's practically guaranteed that the wealthy will continue to waste the majority of productive cropland producing animal feed for their meat-heavy diets right up until billions starve. Jesus Christ, it's a cartoon. We're a parody of ourselves. We're a parody of ourselves. Like, 6.3, globalization. The supply system fragility described above obviously affects far more than just the food supply. All other critical supplies and materials needed for civilization similarly depend on foreign production, marine shipping, ports, truck drivers, warehouses, etc. Similar to the grocery store experiment, try going to your local hardware home improvement store and look at some made in blank labels. Just a couple examples. I found plywood made in Brazil and lumber made in Sweden. Every aspect of our globalized supply chain is hyper fragile. When shocks eventually exceed the system's resiliency, for example, if a climate-caused famine creates gaps in those essential workers so taken for granted during COVID, citizens of industrialized countries will experience shortages of building materials, gasoline and diesel, car repair parts. These shortages will create feedbacks affecting other sectors. A hyper-fragile system, pushed beyond its limit, will experience impacts far exceeding the magnitude of the shock. 6.4. Shifting weather patterns and climate zones. The biggest threat to crops is the shifting of weather patterns and climate zones. Crops that are evolved and adapted to a particular climate may not fare as well when the local climate becomes warmer, wetter, drier, etc. From a 2016 study by Zach Laib, extremely early springs, such as March 2012, can lead to severe economical losses and agricultural damage when they are followed by hard freeze events. We found a marked increase in the frequency of March 2012-like springs by mid-century, in addition to an overall trend towards earlier spring onsets, which nearly doubles that of observational records. However, changes in the date of last freeze do not occur at the same time, therefore causing a potential increase in the threat of plant tissue damage. The graphic below is from a recent update. The red here is 20 days early. The blue is 20 days late. Global warming doesn't just mean temperatures getting warmer. It also means increasing extremes and variability. The hallmark of the Holocene was climate stability. We've left that era behind. The graphs below are extracted from Hansen's nutshell, showing that not only has the mean temperature become warmer, but extreme events have become more common, as reflected in the widening of the base of the bell curve at the right. Bread Bunny, John, the impacts of climate change you were looking for, right, is in the first paragraph of the abstract. Yet the population of the Earth will be under 2 billion by 2050. Boy, howdy. Boy, howdy. CH, good to see you. Good to see you, man. Sorry, I'm just taking a bit of a break. Just taking a moment. Ranger Doomer. Got some strong comments in here. Oh, yeah, you're talking about Argentina, right? Millie? Yeah, dude. Like, he didn't lie. Like, that's the thing about Millie that I think is so interesting, right? Like, he said exactly what he... Like, this is the thing about him. He's a psycho, obviously. But, like, he didn't lie. He said exactly what he was going to do. And I think he actually believed what he was going to do was going to work, right? So he's like a true believer, because he's like a psycho. He's like a total schizo, right? And so I'm with you. I put it on the voters. Like, this guy stood in front of them and said the best way to build our society is to completely destroy it, right? And everybody went, yeah, that sounds right. And they voted for him. Okay. I didn't expect the leopard to eat my face. Fiddleford, good to see you. Simmons states extremely hot summers in the Northern Hemisphere have gone from happening 0.1% of the time in 1951 to 1980 to 22.1% of the time in 2009 to 2019. That's over a 20,000% increase. Increasing variability means it's not as simple as just moving farms north as the climate warms, even if that were possible. Refer back to sections 5.2 and then consider future food insecurity. Since approximately 2020, the jet stream has essentially been broken. We now see, since approximately 2020, the jet stream has essentially been broken. We now see increasing frequency of polar vortex systems, diving deep into the mid-latitudes, and extreme warm events over the poles. We hear the term blocking pattern constantly on the local news describing why a weather system has been stuck in its current configuration for weeks. California has just experienced a solid month of extreme rain and snowfall. The reforming Tulare Lake, which was drained for farming a century ago, could remain on the landscape for years, disrupting growers in a region that produces a significant proportion of the nation's supply of almonds, pistachios, milk, and fruit. High-stakes decisions over where that water travels could resonate across the country's grocery store shelves. Lower latitude weather is governed by Hadley circulations, which are also weakening. The Hadley circulation has considerably weakened over the recent decades. We further show that the weakening of the circulation is attributable to anthropogenetic emissions, discussed by one author here. These same shifts in weather patterns and climate zones will affect wild animals as well. Already humans have killed off the vast majority of wild animals and destroyed their habitats for agriculture and development. The remaining wild animals cannot simply migrate north, as climate zones shift for several reasons. First, present climate change is happening far faster than previous natural events. Animals cannot move and adapt to new locations fast enough. Second, we've destroyed and are fragmented enough wild habitat that many animals don't have anywhere to go. It does the animals in the Everglades no good if the new swamp regions emerge elsewhere after Florida becomes inundated with seawater, if those new swamp regions are not physically connected in a way those animals can safely traverse. Birds that may be able to more easily access new areas cannot be assured of adequate food sources if their preferred prey does not also inhabit these new climate zones. Quoting White again, speed kills. 6.5. Sea level rise. I have written very little about sea level rise, SLR, so far, because it is my least familiar topic, and projections for magnitude and timing both vary widely depending on the source. It is certain that over the next 1,000+ years that sea level will rise on the order of 60 to 80 meters, but near-term projections are much more difficult to nail down, depending largely on the exact behavior of various ice sheets. In Hansen's Global Warming in the Pipeline paper, he mentions that there will be forthcoming sea level rise in the Pipeline paper, and provides a few summary points. I will likely update this article after that paper becomes available. Continued warming and increasing ice melts can cause shutdowns of the overturning ice circulations within decades, and large sea level rise within a century. It is concluded that the time scale for loss of the West Arctic ice sheet and multi-meter sea level rise would be an order of a century, not a millennium. Eventual impacts would include loss of coastal cities and flooding of regions such as Bangladesh, the Netherlands, a substantial portion of China, the state of Florida in the United States. Such outcomes could be locked in soon. This slide below is taken from White's presentation and shows Florida during the last glaciation and after the melting of Greenland and Antarctica. Florida. For my analysis, I consider SLR likely will not become a critical factor until after civilization has already collapsed. SLR will be an important factor threatening the small number of survivors who make it past 2050. At that point, a significant concern will be all the abandoned nuclear power plants along coastlines. More than 12 years after the Fukushima disaster, Japan is still dealing with radioactive contaminated water. 6.6. Insurance. Insurance is an easily overlooked but critically important factor to the stability of civilization. As Roger Hallam put it recently, no insurance, no economy. All property values in the United States are underpinned by disaster insurance. If a property is in a flood zone, fire zone, earthquake zone, etc., you must carry the relevant disaster insurance or you cannot get financing. If your property is deemed too high risk for insurance, no one is going to buy it because they will not be able to get financing. If insurers pull out of an area, the property values will tank, essentially becoming stranded assets. If businesses leave, then residents don't have jobs. It's yet another example of a fragile system with a clearly defined breaking point that once passed will cause tremendous cascading impacts. What he's describing is what I've been describing this whole time, the capitalist abandonment, right? The capitalist abandonment of the financial sector, that people won't have jobs and so they won't be able to buy food, et cetera, right? The model will collapse. A new study finds homeowners insurance is becoming less available and less affordable in Colorado. The study in the Colorado Division of Insurance shows 76% of insurers decreased the number of Coloradans they covered last year. And over the last 3 years, the average insurance premium here has jumped nearly 52%. While some insurers are selectively canceling policies in high-risk areas, and many are considering migration when deciding whether to insure a property, the study says the problem isn't isolated to high areas as high risk for wildfire. It found policies are being canceled and premiums are climbing across the state. Colorado has the third highest risk of wildfire and the second highest number of hail claims in the country. Climate change is destabilizing the insurance industry, driving up prices and pushing insurers out of high-risk markets. Climate change is injecting uncertainty into an industry based on risk prediction and has created a crisis of confidence around the ability to predict loss. Reinsurance companies, which help insurers pay catastrophic losses, have been withdrawing from high-risk areas around wildfire and flood in particular. Florida's state-run property insurer warned recently that Hurricane Ian had significantly depleted its reserves and that it might impose a surcharge on millions of policyholders in the state if another major hurricane generates massive claims. In California, the state-run FAIR Plan has accumulated a $332 million deficit, while it charges premiums that are too low and has limited reinsurance to cover claims from a catastrophic wildfire. Growing risks from climate change and rising reinsurance costs have caused insurers to raise premiums and pull out of markets, leaving homeowners with fewer choices, less protection, and more financial distress, Keyes said. Watkins said that when insurance companies stop selling policies in an area, it can cause ripple effects that endanger entire communities and create a downward spiral that's difficult to emerge from. The spiral could occur gradually, Watkins said, but it's possible for weakened markets to collapse quickly through a crisis of confidence triggered by one event. California's growing wildfire risks have created challenges for its insurance markets in recent years, characterized by rising premiums and deductibles, declines in coverage, and sometimes even policy discontinuance. When homeowners are unable to obtain insurance through the private market, they can turn to the state's Fair Access to Insure Requirements plan, a pool made up of all insurers authorized to operate in the state. Fair Plan policies tend to be high cost and provide substantially less coverage than standard policies. For example, they typically do not offer liability coverage. Just those two fire seasons, 2017 and 18 alone, decimated more than a quarter century's worth of underwriting profits for the California insurance market. White, in the video linked in section 5.2, states, "The federal flood insurance program could become the largest entitlement program out there, larger than Social Security, larger than Medicare, Medicaid, given the trillions and trillions of dollars of assets we have on the coasts." An insurance crisis following a series of major climate-related catastrophes such as fires and floods could very easily exceed the severity of the 2008 housing crash. It is not unthinkable that the United States could witness millions of internal refugees abandoning stranded assets in uninsurable cities. 6.7. Non-climate change related threats. Bill Rees is one of a number of climate scientists who portray climate change as one symptom of a larger planetary problem of ecological overshoot. In this excellent lecture, he briefly touches on ocean acidification, freshwater contamination, deforestation, soil erosion, desertification, overfishing, and species extinctions. A few key quotes. It's not just mammals. Wild bird populations are also tumbling. Domestic poultry now constitutes 70% of the world's avian biomass. Average populations of thousands of monitored species of wild vertebrates, birds, fish, mammals, amphibians have declined 60% since 1970. Populations of invertebrates, including essential pollinators, are also in free fall. Butterflies, down 53%. Beetles, down 49%. Bumblebees, down 46%. All species monitored by WWF are down 68 to 70% in just 50 years. In coming years, there's no question the human enterprise will contract. With a 2-degree increase in mean global temperature, Israel will become uninhabitable. With a 2-degree increase in mean global temperature, Israel will become uninhabitable. It may take some kind... This quote just strikes me with what's going on in Israel right now. Couldn't happen to a better people. It may take some kind of micro-catastrophe to wake enough people up to the fact that they themselves are threatened. See, another of our socially constructed myths is that our technology and our wealth will protect us from the worst consequences of this. In North America, we're being told that, climate change may be happening, but it's happening over there to other people. And that appeals to another natural instinct of humans. We are natural discounters. Human beings prefer the here and now and close relatives and friends to any distant place, total strangers, and merely possible future events. So even though science is telling us this is what the future is going to happen, we tend to displace that into other people elsewhere. And hence we don't have to do much over here. We are self-delusionalists. It had remarkably high survival value 10,000 years ago. But in rapidly changing circumstances, such as today, it becomes maladaptive. Destruction of the oceans is far worse than just the direct acts of overfishing, this 2010 study found. The recent dip in phytoplankton wasn't a passing phase. It had been happening in most parts of the ocean for more than a century. On average, the planet has lost 1% of its phytoplankton every year since 1900. You compound that over a century, this becomes a huge, huge decline. Indeed, Worm's team estimates that phytoplankton numbers have plummeted 40% since 1950. What's more, the team found that phytoplankton numbers were more than likely to dwindle in areas of the ocean that were warming, suggesting that climate change is responsible for the drop. The loss of phytoplankton is a huge problem for marine food chains, says Worm, because every creature in the ocean either eats phytoplankton or eats other organisms that depend on it. If their numbers start to decrease, the population of these species drop as well. The rest of the food web would basically contract, he says. Even more chilling is the potential impact on our atmosphere. The ocean absorbs 40% of the CO2 humans emit. Phytoplanktons, in turn, convert that CO2 into oxygen or die and bury it at the bottom of the ocean. If the phytoplankton are disappearing, Richardson says, the ocean as a carbon sink is declining. And what that means is ultimately more CO2 will stay in the atmosphere instead of being dissolved in the ocean. This 2015 NASA study confirmed the 1% per year decline rate. PFAS are a threat to drinking water supplies, only now beginning to be studied and understood, with regulations lagging far behind. And lastly, we cannot ignore the threat of pandemics such as COVID. We have evidence that COVID harms reproductive health in addition to the acute and chronic risks of death and disability. This 2021 study found a consistent association between pregnant individuals with COVID-19 diagnosis and higher rates of adverse outcomes, including maternal mortality, preeclampsia, and preterm birth, compared with pregnant individuals without COVID-19 diagnosis. This 2023 article reports finding COVID in fetal brain tissue in instances of pregnant people passing the infection to their children, including increased occurrences of brain hemorrhages. Each of these threats are worth their own in-depth investigations, and I will not attempt to fully expound upon them here. The point is to highlight how astronomically foolish the IPCC's fantasy of strip mining the entire planet for copper and lithium is, even in an alternate reality where that was feasible. We still would be facing near-term extinction due to all the other planetary destruction that is not included in discussions of climate change. The standard assumption that tech will save us, there's no need to overthrow capitalism, is insanity beyond insanity, hubris beyond hubris. Number 7, real scenarios. Having established that the IPCC's scenarios are junk, what might the coming decades actually look like? First, let's take a look who the actors are, who can actually influence policies and practice. 7.1. Who is at the wheel? In as few words as possible, fossil fuel CEOs and billionaires, and their servants in government, determine what path we take, past, present, and future. From a January 2023 study published in Science. In 2015, investigative journalists uncovered internal company documents showing that Exxon scientists have been warning their executives about potential catastrophe for anthropogenic human-caused global climate change since at least 1977. Researchers and journalists have subsequently unearthed additional documents showing that the U.S. oil and gas industry writ large, by way of its trade association, the American Petroleum Institute, has been aware of potential human-caused global warming since at least the 1950s. The coal industry, since at least the 1960s. Electric utilities, Total Oil Company and General Motors and Ford Motor Oil Company, since at least the 1970s. And Shell Oil Company since at least the 1980s. We find that most of these projections accurately forecast warming that is consistent with subsequent observations. Their projections were also consistent with, and at least as skillful as, those of independent academic and government models. Exxon and ExxonMobil Corp. Also correctly rejected the prospect of a coming ice age, accurately predicted when human-caused global warming would first be detected, and reasonably estimated the carbon budget for holding warming below 2 degrees Celsius. On each of these points, however, the company's public statements about climate science contradicted its own scientific data. Our findings demonstrate that ExxonMobil didn't just know something about global warming decades ago. They knew as much as academic and government scientists knew. But whereas those scientists worked to communicate what they knew, ExxonMobil worked to deny it, including overemphasizing uncertainties, denigrating climate models, mythologizing global cooling, feigning ignorance about the discernibility of human-caused warming, and staying silent about the possibility of stranded fossil fuel assets in a carbon-constrained world. On each of these points, however, the company's public statements about climate science contradicted its own scientific data. It is absolutely critical to understand that global warming is not happening by accident. Our current predicament is not a surprise. Fossil fuel CEOs and their servants in the U.S. government chose our present reality deliberately and doubled down on that decision every year for over 4 decades. Meanwhile, President Biden has approved more new offshore drilling in the Gulf of Mexico and new drilling in Alaska. Billionaires, for their part, stand ready to retreat to their bunkers, guarded by robot dogs with machine guns. Douglas Rushkoff's 2018 article, recently expanded into a book, describes his encounter with a room full of billionaires. Finally, the CEO of a brokerage house explained that he had nearly completed building his own underground bunker system and asked, "How do I maintain authority over my security force after the event?" The event. That was their euphemism for the environmental collapse, social unrest, nuclear explosion, unstoppable virus, or Mr. Robot hack that takes everything down. This single question occupied us for the rest of the hour. They knew armed guards would be required to protect their compounds from the angry mobs. But how would they pay the guards once money was worthless? What would stop the guards from choosing their own leader? The billionaires considered using special combination locks on the food supply that they only knew, or making guards wear disciplinary collars of some kind in return for their survival, or maybe building robots to serve as guards and workers, if that technology could be developed in time. Billionaires are, by definition, psychopaths. It is impossible to earn $1 billion. Take any exorbitant salary you like, let's say $500,000 a year, and calculate how many years you would have to work, spending nothing, to earn your first billion. At $500,000 a year, it would take 2,000 years. Or if you simply steal $3 from every single American, you can make $1 billion in a single year. Billionaires' wealth comes only from wage theft from workers. It is never earned. It is estimated that 5% of deaths in the United States are attributable to poverty, making every billionaire a de facto mass murderer. No one becomes a billionaire because they are intelligent or talented. People become billionaires because they are able to rob millions of other people into poverty, destitution, and early death, and still sleep soundly at night. These are the people determining our future. They are brain damaged by power. They believe they are chosen by the universe to live as gods. If you are banking on billionaires to save the planet because it's in their best interests, you misunderstand their interests. Nowhere in this list of relevant actors will you find the general public. Protests, emails to Congress, and voting will have no impact. Quoting Chomsky from Understanding Power. If the general population is the most powerful country in the world remains marginalized, we aren't going to have to worry very much about history, because there isn't going to be any. And that's not very far away at this point. Chomsky said that 24 years ago. And in the intervening years, the U.S. public has become more repressed and marginalized than ever. 7.2. On a knife's edge. As of early 2023, we are currently sitting at 1.3 degrees Celsius global warming, having just exited a cool La Niña phase and headed into 1, a warm El Niño phase, 2, a particularly active solar maximum, and 3, continued massive reductions to sulfur pollution that provides aerosol shielding. Summer 2024 is going to be bad, worse than anything we've ever seen. It will shock the world. This is not hyperbole. This is not alarmism. This is the simplest expression of the current facts. Anyone with any understanding of risk assessment or precautionary planning should understand that this is not a joke. In the movie Don't Look Up, when the 3 scientists are presenting their findings to the president, she responds, "Do you know how many the world is ending meetings we've had? We're all a bit crisis fatigued after enduring over 3 years of ever-worsening pandemic and constant government and media gaslighting. But you cannot allow cynicism over nuclear war, terrorist attacks, etc. to blind you to the fact that we are absolutely balanced on a knife edge right now. The warming we experienced starting 2024 could very well activate significant methane releases from Arctic Circle permafrost or cause the first blue ocean event. Any prolonged decrease in economic activity could drop our aerosol shield even further. If any of those happen, we could see 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the decade. If all of those happen together, it could be 2.5 degrees Celsius or even higher. Nothing can adapt that fast. I do not have a crystal ball. I cannot see the future, but I can damn well see the range of possibilities. The future that most people are blithely assuming and basing their plans on is most certainly not in that window. The next decade is going to catch people by surprise. 7.3. From famine and fascism to collapse and extinction. Crop production depends on a stable climate. It is not a matter of if, but of when a significant catastrophe occurs. A globally significant famine is going to happen. It could happen in 2 years, or it could take 10 to 15. I can't know that. But the trends are clear. When that happens, the import-dependent United States will not be spared. I think the biggest, most critical failure of imagination is in how people assume the U.S. government will respond to this catastrophe. In any crisis, the response is of equal significance as the actual event. Capitalism solves shortages by increasing prices. Other countries may take a more humane approach to food rationing, but the United States government is absolutely not going to supply emergency rations to the public. The poor will simply starve. The United States government is preparing for climate change by hiring 100,000 additional police officers, an approximate 15% increase to our already obscenely bloated militarized domestic occupation force of 680,000. This is America's climate change adaptation plan. More police. When collapse begins, the National Guard and militarized police will stand ready to destroy any protests or resistance. The foundation of capitalism is growth. It's the only way interest rates work. Capitalism requires growth and will absolutely not allow any efforts to scale it down. The U.S. just created the largest ever recorded methane release by blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines, with estimates ranging up to 400,000 tons. This act was done in a desperate attempt to prevent the emerging global multipolarity and decline of the U.S. dollar hegemony. The U.S. government is currently pushing China as hard as possible, attempting to start a war over Taiwan. Research shows the U.S. military is one of the largest climate polluters in history, consuming more liquid fuels and emitting more CO2e than most countries. This last 100 plus years of U.S. history can be summarized as capital's complete victory over workers. From Pinkerton's murdering union organizers, to Korea, to Vietnam, the Kent State Massacre, the entire Cold War, every action has had its single aim, the subjugation of workers to capital. For a conflict to qualify as a civil war, most academics use the threshold of 1,000 dead, which leads to the inclusion of a good number of low-intensity rural insurgencies. The number of Americans killed each year by police has been over 1,000 since 2013 at the latest, with 2022 setting a record. These official numbers are believed to be underreported by over 50%. Therefore, it is not unreasonable to state that the U.S. is already in a state of violent civil war, but a civil war where only one side is doing the killing is more accurately called genocide. For every police officer who was killed by a civilian in 2019, 21 civilians were killed by cops. Logging is nearly 10 times more dangerous than policing. Policing is not even in the top 10 most dangerous jobs in America. Alec Karakatsanis does fantastic work explaining how police departments, police unions, and local politicians spread false information about crime waves to justify ever-increasing police budgets, calling the practice propaganda. He has a forthcoming book on the topic. Police gangs are out of control, with Los Angeles and Memphis, merely two that have made the recent news for egregious violence. I have not even mentioned our horrific prison system, to which I could devote an entire chapter. There is a saying in the business world, Do not tell me your priorities. Show me your budget, and I will tell you what your priorities are. There is zero chance of developing any meaningful climate resiliency and significant odds of sharp escalation of violent repression. Summer 2020 was the most optimal time for American workers to strike and demand fundamental changes. It didn't happen then, and we will never have that amount of leverage again. COVID has been extremely revealing about the nature of power and propaganda. We have seen how billionaire pharmaceutical CEOs can get rival vaccines kneecapped. We have seen how public health agencies function essentially as PR for private business. And we have seen how literally millions of dead and disabled Americans can be completely ignored in the interest of keeping the economy pumping ever larger portions of our wages into the pockets of billionaires. The IPCC report serves to keep everyone distracted right up until collapse. Anyone expecting governments to wake up once climate impacts become too large to ignore will be sorely surprised to find only gun barrels in the climate plan. Our government does not stand by ready to help, but ready to violently destroy us when we resist. It is entirely possible, I won't say likely, but definitely possible, that 2024 could be the last U.S. presidential election. Emergency powers should make it possible for whoever holds power at that time to maintain control until collapse of governance. Additionally, we have fascist accelerationist elements that would exploit our civilizational fragility. This excellent and very in-depth reporting on the far right's fascination with the U.S. electric grid details a coast-to-coast pattern of electrical substation attacks, likely inspired by a right-wing plan to push society into collapse. Such a collapse would then allow heavily armed, far-right groups to impose their vision for society onto a desperate and vulnerable civilian population. Opportunistic armed groups may further exacerbate a climate-caused crisis and/or foul up recovery efforts. A positive revolution requires logistics, primarily food, fuel, and weapons, as well as organization and communication. Globalization means we don't have the ability to seize the means of production at a local scale. Social alienation and ubiquitous surveillance means that we are unorganized, lack robust communities to fall back on, and can't communicate securely. Revolution is a tough job when those factors are met. It is impossible without them. The coming violence will be reactionary, not revolutionary. Americans are far more vulnerable than we like to convince ourselves. Our society is hyper-fragile, meaning any breakage in one of the many underlying systems can lead to a complete collapse of the entire system. We depend heavily on imports, as detailed in sections 6.2 and 3. We depend on the crews of workers constantly maintaining our electric grid and telecommunications infrastructure. We produce practically nothing needed for subsistence at the local level. We have zero resiliency. One thing you can always count on billionaires for is hubris. They are actually stupid enough to think they can re-terraform Earth after removing several billion useless eaters. Billionaires likely believe they can survive in their bunkers, and while it is true they will likely be the last to die, they or their children will not survive to the end of this century either. This may be the hardest part for many people to grasp. Billionaires do not have a long game. The only way they know how to act is all or nothing. The wealthy despise workers as vermin. They would rather die than share the world's natural wealth, and they may soon grant their own wish, to be dining and drinking champagne on the deck of the Titanic as it slips beneath the waves. The critical events we have to look forward to in the near future are increasingly erratic catastrophic weather, multi-breadbasket crop failure, global famine, supply chain failures, government violence, right-wing civilian violence, loss of power grids and telecommunications, refugee wars, civilizational collapse, followed by a massive die-off as the aerosol shield disappears and populations revert to a completely unmanaged way to local subsistence without complex supply chains. This last step is where industrialized first world nations will fare far worse than they currently expect. Exactly what follows after that is extremely hard to predict, and will depend largely on whether nuclear weapons are detonated during that collapse. But assuming no nuclear war, by no means a safe assumption, I would expect that by 2050, when global average temperature is at least 2 degrees Celsius, that no organized governments will remain. No global logistics or fossil fuel transport or refining. No large-scale fossil fuel-dependent agriculture. No dense cities. All nuclear power stations abandoned and leaking. Global population will be clustered in whatever geographical regions turned out to suffer the least inhospitable weather. Very hard to predict where those will be. I have previously quoted Will Steffens saying 4 degrees Celsius is not survivable by humans. Here are a few more comments on extinction from scientists. This article by Bill Rees is titled, "Yes, the Climate Crisis May Wipe Out 6 Billion People." A climate symposium organized to discuss the implications of a 4 Celsius warmer world concluded, less than 1 billion people will survive. Here is Schellenhuber is quoted as saying, at 4 degrees Celsius, Earth's carrying capacity estimates are below 1 billion people. His words were echoed by Professor Kevin Anderson of the UK's Tyndall Centre for Climate Change. Only about 10% of the planet's population would survive at 4 degrees Celsius. Similarly, in May of this year, Johan Rockström, current director of the Potsdam Institute, opined that in a 4 degrees Celsius warmer world, it is difficult to see how we could accommodate 1 billion people, or even half of that. Borrowing a couple of quotes from this thread by Roger Hallam, Peter Kalmus, I am working on projections of extreme humid heat, and hopefully will soon be communicating the results publicly and refining them over time. They are harrowing. All of this activism must be seen in the context of potential for future death and suffering. When billions of lives are at stake, including the lives of people we love or even our own lives, then yes, risking arrest to try to stop that through nonviolent civil disobedience is probably worth it for a lot of us. James Dyke. Most people are oblivious to the fact that we've already produced irreversible climate change. The Holocene is over. What we do next determines what sort of future we have. Indeed, if we have any sort of future on planet Earth. It's notable to look at how some of those estimates are worded. We're not talking about a best guess 1 billion with error margins plus minus. We're talking about 1 billion on the high end, with the unspoken low end of the estimate range being 0. And these estimates come from people with full faith in their governments to enact and build meaningful climate resiliency plans before then. In some cases, currently employed by the US government, speaking on the record where they can be quoted on the internet by people like me. At every step, we've consciously made the worst possible decisions, allowing a small number of psychopaths to lead and to decide for the complacent masses. The idea that we'll somehow pull our act together at the last minute and hit the high end is not serious. All this is just the first step along the road to an eventual 10 degrees Celsius Earth already baked into present CO2 levels. 8. Conclusion. It's simpler than you think. If there is one key takeaway from all of this, it's that climate change is far simpler than we've been led to believe. You can throw out all the talk of net zero, carbon dioxide removal, scenarios and pathways, carbon budgets, and whatever other buzzwords the IPCC will introduce next. 1. The physical climate facts are: we've put over 1 trillion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere that we cannot remove. Along with other GHGs, it will warm the globe by at least 4 degrees Celsius by 2100, even if all emissions stopped today. Agricultural failure is imminent within a decade or so. The socio-political facts are: hyper-fragile, Modern civilization will collapse following agricultural failure. We are not going to geoengineer our way out of this. There will not be revolution. Fascism is ascendant, and governments will protect billionaires and sacrifice the working class. There's nothing we can do except try to soften the blow on children and the most vulnerable. After 1,500 years or so, the Earth will have warmed to 10 degrees Celsius, which will be practically a sterilizing event for the planet. Earth will be doing good to still have anything larger than bacteria alive. If complex life ever evolves on this planet again, the only sign humans ever existed will be a geological layer of plastic microparticles. Why don't scientists agree? There are several reasons why most scientists are happily trotting along with net zero. Some are simply lying. Climate scientist James Dyke posted recently, "Last year I asked someone who, let's say he's quite a bit of experience in climate politics, if they thought they were going to pass 1.5. They said, of course, but we can't say that yet. I asked them, well, what should we say about 1.5? There was a long pause. Climate scientist and author Bill McGuire wrote an open letter to all climate scientists saying, I have talked to many of you in private, and the response without exception has been that the true situation is far worse than you are prepared to admit in public. Others, to put it bluntly, are idiots. The majority of what we call scientists today should be more properly called technicians or specialists. Increasing complexity means it takes an entire career of study to reach the cutting edge and be able to advance the discipline. If it took 15 years to learn to be a truck driver, we wouldn't call truck drivers scientists. These are not well-rounded thinkers, a far cry from what used to be called natural philosophy. They are as narrow-focused and siloed as it is possible for a human to be. They have zero understanding of the world they live in or its politics, how fragile their life support systems are, or where their food comes from. Most have zero knowledge or understanding of ecology. James Hansen is an Andrew Yang supporter, for God's sakes. He seriously wants to put a millionaire con artist in charge of solving climate change. This is not something that a competent adult can think. I tried asking both Zach Labe and Leon Simons on Twitter about why other data sources haven't been incorporated, and they both ignored the question. Bill Reese can barely make it through a single paragraph without broadcasting his extreme fixation on overpopulation. I trust climate scientists to crunch numbers and nothing more. A kinder way to say this would be that it is extremely difficult to do both production and analysis at the same time. It is difficult, all-consuming work to develop, compile, coordinate, and present specialized new findings. It is a tall order to expect a person engaged in that effort to also conduct a thorough analysis of disciplines outside their own. This comment by Professor Ray Wills is illustrative. Science is naturally conservative, and so if projections from models are wrong, science is most often wrong by understatement. I can hardly express how galactically wrong this is. In science and engineering, conservative means a low tolerance for risk. For example, if you ask an engineer to design a bridge for you that can support trucks weighing up to 40 tons, a conservative engineer will design a bridge with a safety factor to ensure it can actually support trucks up to 50 or 60 tons. The greater the factor of safety, the more conservative the design. If climate scientists are underestimating climate impacts, that is the opposite of a conservative approach. This illuminates which threats climate science considers most important and worth hedging their bets against. Rather than taking a conservative approach to human safety, up to and including the threat of human extinction, climate scientists choose to hedge against getting yelled at, or yelled at for being alarmist. That is the primary threat that they felt the need to take a conservative approach to defend against. The thought of getting egg on their face was more frightening than the prospect of human extinction. Another reason is that we're asking the wrong people. I do not ask a doctor what type of oil to run in my car's engine. I do not ask an engineer what multivitamin I should take. And I do not ask a climate scientist how living systems are going to respond to calculated warming, or how societies will respond when people are starving to death by the hundreds of millions. They don't know. It's outside their realm of expertise. But of course they're happy to pontificate. Climate science is possibly the most complicated application of advanced 3D fluid physics out there. Every climate scientist is also a skilled mathematician and likely a programmer. However, after producing their numbers, they have nothing more to add to the conversation than any layman. It doesn't help the matter that the agricultural sciences are full of conservative climate deniers. Those are the folks who should really be sounding the alarm right now. But I have zero hope that any Texas A&M grads are going to lead the charge in challenging the Davos narrative on climate change or encouraging plant-based diets. A final lens to understand the failure of climate scientists to recognize the reality of our situation is explained by Noam Chomsky, who has repeated emphatically for decades that analyzing global geopolitics is staggeringly simple. An ordinary 15-year-old can do it. As a linguist, his education and research career expertise have no relation to his writings on geopolitics. When asked what his qualifications are, he has to support his assertions. He responds, "I have none, and I need none." I mean, if someone were to ask me to give a talk on quantum physics, I'd refuse, because I don't understand it enough. But world affairs are trivial. There's nothing in the social sciences or history or whatever that is beyond the intellectual capacities of an ordinary 15-year-old. You have to do a little work, and you have to do some reading, and you have to be able to think, but there's nothing deep. If there are any theories around that require some special kind of training to understand, they've been kept a carefully guarded secret. Echoing some of the points made by Kevin Anderson in section 4.4, Chomsky writes, "Typically the elites are the most indoctrinated segment of a society, because they are the ones who are exposed to the most propaganda, and actually take part in the decision-making process." He describes a selection process that begins in kindergarten. These comments are aimed at journalists, but apply equally well to climate scientists. Because if they have the capacity to think freely and understand these types of things, they're going to be kept out by a very complicated filtering system, which actually starts in kindergarten, I think. In fact, the whole educational and professional training system is a very elaborate filter, which just weeds out people who are too independent, and who think for themselves, and who don't know how to be submissive, and so on, because they're dysfunctional to institutions. I beg you all to please go to your local library and ask for a copy of Understanding Power, sit down in a comfy chair, and read Chapter 4. In 30 minutes you will have attained a level of understanding held by less than 1% of the American population, and you will know exactly why climate sciences are not screaming about near-term extinction. The ultimate effect on the public of all of this is that no one knows what to think. The IPCC says everything's fine, that magical technology will fix everything. Fox News says it's all fake, made up by scientists for some reason that Fox can never explain. Hannah Arendt summarized the effect perfectly in a 1974 interview. The moment we no longer have a free press, anything can happen. What makes it possible for a totalitarian or any other dictatorship to rule is that people are not informed. How can you have an opinion if you are not informed? If everybody always lies to you, the consequence is not that you believe the lies, but rather that nobody believes anything any longer. This is because lies, by their very nature, have to be changed, and a lying government has to constantly rewrite its own history. On the receiving end, you get not only one lie, a lie which you could go on for the rest of your days, but you get a great number of lies, depending on how the political wind blows, and a people that no longer can believe anything cannot make up its mind. It is deprived not only of its capacity to act, but also of its capacity to think and to judge, and with such a people, you can then do what you please. This is the position we find ourselves in today. It is true of climate change. It is true of COVID. It is true of every significant issue in the modern world. We are lied to so consistently and pervasively that most of the public gives up on the very idea of knowing the truth about anything. Our cultural overemphasis on credentialism undermines interdisciplinary analysis and critical thinkers that challenge the status quo. Notes. I won't bother reading these notes. Well, that was sobering. That was sobering. Thank you for being here for that. Thank you for those of you who stayed. Thank you for those of you who watched. I don't know what to say. I love you all. I'm happy you're here. And I don't just mean in my chat, but I mean here, on this planet, during this time. June, I have no idea. I'm going to plant a garden. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to plant a garden. Because it seems to me that that's the only thing left for us to do. I think the thing that's best for all of us, and the reason why I'm glad that I read that article, is to not live in delusion, to not live in despair, to not fall into depression, to not live in a state of desperation, to not become reactive, but to move forward with eyes wide open and the understanding of what is coming and what is to come. Spicy Meatball on Twitch asked, what was that article called? Thank you for asking that question. That article was The Busy Worker's Handbook to the Apocalypse, written by Sam Hall in Medium. Plant a garden. Talk to your neighbors. Don't ask for permission. Just begin doing things. Make them stop you. And in the end, I find myself quite glad. Because there needs to be someone to see and bear witness and watch it. Because there needs to be those of us who understand what's happening and understand what's going to happen. So that as it happens, we still regain our senses and we still maintain our senses. That as this occurs, emotion will prevail. We will be swept up in a hysteria. I have no intention of being swept up in a hysteria. My intention, God willing, is to hit record and to continue speaking. To continue talking and to continue discussing and to continue being here. Day by day. Moment by moment if I can. Because I owe that not just to you, not just to myself, but to my Creator. And that's what I will do. Until I can't. Thank you for being here. Each and every one of you. And always remember, each and every one of you is a quantum being walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes you'll never realize it. You'll just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.